Story 1.
After discovering my wife's affair, I got revenge on her cheating lover and left her life in ruins. I'm Tom Jode, and my wife is Linda. Our paths crossed in college when I was 23, and she was 21. At that time, I was in the Army, pursuing a dual degree in economics and accounting, while she pursued a major in biology. My military duties were sporadic but hazardous. Our unit was tasked with discrete missions, often involving retribution against someone seemingly friendly. In essence, we functioned as assassins, with my specialty lying in planning and close combat. I graduated at 25, and 2 years later, I resigned from the Army to marry Linda. Within 4 years, 2 daughters arrived. I worked independently, handling accounting for local businesses and trading commodities from home, while Linda, busy with the kids, later secured a position at a local college-affiliated laboratory. After a decade of marriage, with both girls in school, I worked from home to facilitate Linda's return to employment, which she enjoyed. We resided in the house I grew up in, having bought it from my parents when they moved to Florida. Some of our Army missions offered the unit a chance at loot, which we divided among the members. Having some financial stability, we opted to celebrate one February. We went out with our neighborhood friends for dinner and dancing at a club. There were 8 of us, each with a babysitter for the night. Linda and I had booked a room at the hotel connected to the club. She looked stunning at 56, slim with brunette hair, dressed in a blue silky dress. We had an enjoyable meal and a great time dancing at the club. During the evening, a group of 6 entered, including Mark Stevens, a prominent local team's all-pro linebacker. He was noticed by all the women at our table, accompanied by a lovely blonde woman wearing what seemed like a large engagement ring. Our friend June mentioned she was a cheerleader for the team, engaged to Stevens. After some time, Stevens focused on our table and approached. Without acknowledging me, he asked Linda to dance. I attempted to intervene, but Linda went along without a backward glance. Annoyed, I walked to the bar, passing by them. Linda seemed indifferent. As I got a coffee after 2 fast dances, a slow number played, and Linda embraced Mark. Feeling irked, I walked to the bar, ignoring disapproval from the women at our table. Linda, absorbed in her dance with Mark, didn't notice when the slow number ended. They separated, and Linda walked back to our table. I stayed at the bar sipping my coffee. Spotting me, Linda seemed flustered and sat next to June. Approaching them, I remarked that they seemed to have had their fun, though I may have gotten a bit carried away. June explained that it was just a bit of dancing, nothing serious. Feeling offended, I took a seat as June and Linda excused themselves to the ladies' room. When they returned, Linda wasn't with June. Curious, I asked where Linda was, and June informed me that she had left with Mark. Shocked, I rushed outside and saw Linda getting into a red Escalade, which then drove off. Back at the table, June addressed the others, questioning if they were aware of Linda's actions. I suggested to June that she should let Linda have her night and that she would likely return the next day. Frustrated, I asserted that I didn't need Linda to come back and declared that our relationship was over when June talked to her. This proclamation caused a stir at the table, with some thinking I was too harsh. Angrily, I snapped at them, expressing my desire to have nothing to do with any of them, considering they knew what was happening but didn't warn me. As I headed towards the coat check desk, I noticed a blonde woman at the table with the others who had come with Stevens. She was in tears, so I approached and asked if she was his girlfriend. She confirmed that she was, but clarified that it was no longer the case. She revealed that they had gone to their house on Cherry Lane, and he had promised not to do such things once they were engaged. Apologetically, she mentioned that he would likely be finished with Linda by morning and would drive her home. Enjoying gloating at the husband, the other 2 guys, one black and one white, took offense, but I ignored them. I handed her my business card and told her to give me a call. Despite her tears, she smiled, and I walked away. I retrieved my coat but left Linda's, then went to the hotel room and took my case but left Linda's. I checked out. While driving home, a fully formed plan came to me. This had happened to me while I was serving, and it's why I was alive now. It's a shame a plan hadn't occurred to me then before Linda left. I parked my car in the garage, engaged the security system, and retrieved a rope stored in the basement. I undressed, put on a black Under Armour suit, a black hoodie, dark gray sweatpants, old sneakers, and 2 sets of gloves. I also grabbed a balaclava mask. Climbing up to the attic with the rope, I fastened it securely to a beam, as I had done in my childhood home. I climbed out of the narrow window, bounced down the side of the house, and ran through the wooded area on that side. I hopped the side fence and headed to the rear workshop. Inside, I got a backpack, extra wool socks, a pink towel, and an old hand axe from a toolbox. I packed everything and grabbed my bike, pedaling toward the river through the woods, across the river bridge, and up toward Cherry Street. Spotting the house with the football statue and a red Escalade, I used the axe to break the passenger side window, triggering the alarm. I hid behind a porch pillar, and when the door opened, I swiftly dealt with the man with 2 blows of the axe. Returning inside, I closed the front door, turned, and jogged off. I jumped the stone wall, retrieved my bike, and took the wool socks out. I put the axe, knife, gloves, and shoes inside the backpack, zipped it up, and mounted up, riding away toward the river. Near the bridge, I stopped and tossed the entire backpack as far as I could into the fast-moving river. There had been rain the day before, and the river was moving fast. Riding my bike back home through the nearby woods, I let myself inside the workshop. I changed my socks and switched to another pair of sneakers, spraying an ammonia solution on the bike handles and pedals. I wiped them clean. Jogging back, I hopped the side fence and climbed up the house's side, which proved to be more challenging than expected. Nevertheless, I made it and scrambled through the small window, pulling up the rope. I wound it and wiped the windowsill with a rag. Trotting down to the basement, I used the rope to remove all my clothing, including the mask and undergloves, and put them into the washer. In the basement bathroom, I showered for an extended period, washing everything twice. After completing that, I put on a pair of exercise shorts and went upstairs, leaving the basement door open to hear when the washer stopped. Contemplating for a moment, I decided to wear the clothing from the club the night before. Returning to the basement, I transferred the wet clothing to the dryer. Going upstairs, I made a snack, had a shot of whiskey, and sat for a while, reflecting on things. When the dryer stopped, I took the clothes upstairs, put them away. The balaclava mask went back into the closet where I had initially stored it. Glancing at the clock, it was 2:50 a.m. The entire sequence from entering the house after the club to this moment began at midnight. Going downstairs, I sat on the couch, had another whiskey, and fell asleep. I woke to the door chime, checked the door camera display, and saw 2 individuals. An African-American woman and a white guy with a crew cut. They were cops. The doorbell rang again, and I opened it. Detective Asper and Detective Logan introduced themselves as they flashed their badges. I was uncertain and asked about Linda, expressing my concern for her safety. They assured me that she hadn't suffered physical damage, but mentioned that Mr. Stevens had been attacked. I invited them inside and inquired about Linda's location. The white detective informed me that she was in the hospital receiving treatment for shock. Pausing for a moment, I looked at them, and they returned the gaze. Indicating the couch, I suggested they take a seat. They chose separate straight-back chairs, and I settled on the couch. "I think you should explain what happened," I proposed. Detective Logan repeated the question, asking what I had done since Linda left the club with Stevens. Detective Asper responded, urging me to share the details, insisting on an answer. Detective Logan pressed, and I explained that I had gone to our hotel room, packed my things, and driven here. I had then consumed enough drinks to fall asleep on the couch. They inquired about anyone else being present, and I confirmed that the kids were with a sitter for the night. When asked if I had made any calls or sent emails, I replied in the negative, but emphasized that I had never left. Detective Asper observed the surroundings and noted the security system, inquiring about its coverage. "I was here. Come upstairs," I suggested. They followed me to the upstairs office, and I sat at the computer desk, demonstrating the system. I downloaded data from 6 p.m. to their arrival, providing them with a jump drive, explaining that the system focused on all 3 doors: front, side, and patio, including the sliding door to the pool area. However, the side I had come down had no door, faced the woods, and had 2 large windows that didn't open, lacking coverage. Logan stated they would need to confiscate the computer. I questioned the need, suggesting they might have tampered with it before arriving. Logan agreed, but emphasized it couldn't be gone for more than a day. I assured him I would download the same data onto an external drive. I carried out the task as they requested to look around. I allowed them but insisted they stay together and with me. They took some pictures and left. It was 7:10 a.m. I informed Linda's parents, John and Stephanie, who lived in the neighborhood, about what had happened. They were at their lake house at the time. John was taken aback by Linda's actions, while Stephanie seemed less surprised. Stephanie asked if I planned to see Linda, to which I declined, expressing my reluctance to have anything to do with her after what she had done. I explained that the guy being attacked was a bad break, but it wasn't my responsibility. Apparently, he had a history of such behavior. I mentioned that when Linda gets out of the hospital, she needs to stay away from me in the house, and we can make arrangements for her belongings. John suggested I move and let Linda stay, but I asserted that it was my house and not community property. The conversation ended, and I called my parents in Florida, recounting the events. They too were shocked by Linda's behavior. My dad mentioned a headline about Stevens being attacked and executed at his home, which didn't come as news to me. The landline rang, and it was Judy. She inquired about Linda's whereabouts, having heard about Mark's passing. I confirmed Linda was in the hospital with shock and expressed my reluctance to see her. Judy urged me to support Linda, but I insisted she would never have my support considering what she had done. The conversation turned heated, and Judy accused me of being a pig before hanging up. I showered again and got dressed to pick up the kids from the sitter around 8. When we got home, the kids asked about Linda, and I informed them she wouldn't be there that day. I suggested we carry on with our day. Getting dressed for soccer, I took them to the soccer complex for their noon and 1:30 games. I relaxed while watching them play, and afterward, we enjoyed ice cream before heading home. Upon returning, I found messages on my muted cell phone. One from Linda's parents stated she was at St. Jude's Hospital, non-communicative. Another from a doctor at the hospital requested a call. One was from Judy, telling me Linda was with the police and not talking to anyone. She said I should probably cool off and bring the girls to see her. I called the girls downstairs, explaining that their mom was in the hospital emotionally damaged but not physically injured. They wanted to know what happened. I told them, "Your mom went off with a famous football player to his house to have lovemaking last night. There's no other way to say this. I thought about keeping it from you, but I figured you'd find out. When she was there, someone attacked the football guy, but apparently not her. But she must have found him or something because she is in the hospital in shock." They hesitated about visiting her, but I instructed them to get dressed, and we proceeded to the hospital. I called Dr. Laura Thompson again, who conveyed that Linda was traumatized and currently in a catatonic state. Inquiring about bringing the kids, she hesitated. The doctor asked if I planned to see her. I expressed reluctance. I suggested bringing the girls if it might help. "Did they know about the circumstances?" she asked, referring to Linda's involvement with the football guy. "Yes," I informed the doctor. "The girls are dressed and ready to come if you believe it might aid Linda." She agreed to meet us in room 3 in 30 minutes at the hospital. Dr. Thompson, a psychiatrist in her late 30s, spoke briefly with us before addressing the girls. She explained their mother's severe shock and apparent disorientation, suggesting that seeing the girls might be beneficial. The girls expressed a desire to see her. I accompanied them to the door and looked in. Linda sat in bed, staring at a TV with cartoons. Tentatively, the girls approached. Laura, the oldest, touched her hand and called her mom. Shelley followed, but there was no reaction. Shelley started to cry. I comforted her, picked her up, glanced at Linda, nothing, and took Laura's hand to lead them out. I mentioned that we had tried. Laura asked if Linda would wake up. I assured her that she would eventually and suggested they might visit her again soon. Shelley whispered, asking, "What if she doesn't wake up?" Reassuringly, I said, "She will. I know it, maybe slowly." The doctor stated, "Girls, I will surely let you know when she comes back from this." We left the hospital, both girls crying in the car. I questioned whether I should have taken them, desiring to see if their presence would help Linda. Despite my callous reaction to her infidelity, I hadn't wished this upon her. I felt remorseful, though she deserved to suffer, not like this. I felt some tears on my cheeks. Back home, I made eggs and toast for them to eat, intentionally involving them in the cooking to lift their spirits. Then I put on a movie for them. In my office, I called a friend, a public defender, seeking information on what happened at Stevens' house after I left. He couldn't obtain police reports but suggested ambulance run reports might be publicly available. I asked him to get that if possible, and we hung up. In the living room, I watched the movie, pondering what might happen. An hour later, my lawyer friend called back, emailing me the ambulance run, revealing a distressing situation. I shared details of the police visit. He stated that if security showed no one coming or going, I likely didn't need to worry. However, he cautioned about potential police actions and recommended a lawyer if needed. Though I believed I didn't need a lawyer, I called the recommended woman. After reviewing the ambulance report, police found Linda with Stevens' head cradled in her lap, covered in blood, dressed in a thin robe, chanting "no" repeatedly. The police took her to the hospital, where she remained unresponsive. An officer had asked if she saw who did it, but she provided no response. This sickened me, making me wonder if she would ever recover. I researched PTSD, having done so before. Specifically, I explored shock-induced catatonic states, noting recovery from the catatonic state but potential long-term effects of PTSD. Lawyer Joan Drake scheduled a Monday morning appointment at 9:30, providing her cell number for early police contact, though none occurred on Sunday. The girls and I lounged, attempting to reassure them about Linda's eventual return and acknowledging she might still need our help. I wondered about Linda's reaction to me, doubting she had witnessed anything significant. If she did, it would likely be a person in black with a mask. Though assumptions were uncertain, I didn't think she had any experience with me that would lead her to seriously consider me capable of what I did. Monday, after sending the girls to school, I monitored local news coverage of Stephen's end of life. Linda's name wasn't mentioned, but it was known he hosted a married woman during the attack. Police were called by a neighbor in response to Linda's screaming. So far, no one but the authorities had connected Linda or me to the incident, but I thought that would change in time. Joan Drake, a nifty-looking blonde of maybe years, heard the story, received the ambulance report, and was appalled. After sharing the security video's integrity, I requested my computer's return for work, providing a retainer. Joan called the police station, requesting Detective Asper for its retrieval. I had previously looked up PTSD, and for me, I researched shock-induced catatonic states. It seemed that people typically recovered from the catatonic state, but might be affected for years by PTSD. The lawyer, Joan Drake, made an appointment for me to see her that Monday morning at 9:30. She gave me her cell number in case the police came earlier, but they didn't. She insisted that I had enough time to see if it had been altered, assuring me that I knew it hadn't. I agreed, stating, "Okay, I'll send someone tomorrow morning to get it from you." "No, I'll send someone from the office." I shook my head, indicating he won't be coming. She nodded in understanding. "Okay, he'll be there at 9. When she was off the phone, I conveyed to her that I wouldn't talk to the cops and that I'd have a phone with me to record the discussions, if any. I departed that afternoon. Upon the girls' return from school, they immediately inquired about Linda. Earlier, I had contacted the doctor, but there was no significant change. They dove into their homework, and later we ordered pizza. Jokingly, I mentioned that if their mom didn't return soon, I'd have to learn how to cook, which elicited laughter. However, I'm actually quite skilled in the kitchen, just not accustomed to cooking at home often. When Laura's sister went upstairs, Laura inquired about my willingness to forgive Mom for her involvement with another man. I responded that, at the moment, I simply wanted her to get better. Shortly after, the landline rang and Jim Bean from the newspaper identified himself as being from the Trib. He conveyed, "We have information suggesting it was your wife Linda who was with Mark Stevens when he was executed. Can you confirm that?" Expressing a preference for the matter to remain private, I elaborated on the potential consequences for my two youngsters in school. Jim proposed, maybe if that information were to come out. Reluctantly, I confirmed it and was questioned about my feelings regarding the passing of my wife's lover. Acknowledging the situation, I stressed that any damage to my family resulting from their publication would lead to legal action against him and his paper. Jim asserted, "This is going to come out, Mr. Jode. I can't prevent that." Observing a TV truck parked in front of the house through the window channel, I conceded, "I see a TV truck. I suppose you're right. Sorry, I have to go." A knock came at the door, and checking the camera feed, I noticed a young woman with a microphone. I communicated over the intercom, "Leave. You're trespassing and I will call the police." "Is your wife there, Mr. Jode?" I called the local precinct and requested assistance in removing the press from my front porch. They responded, dispersing the group of 6 people, but the trucks remained, totaling 4. Next, I called the doctor and urged her to secure Linda before the press invaded. I also discussed relocation and adjusting the girls' schooling with them. However, they insisted on continuing to attend their current school, even if they had to live elsewhere. I said I'd consider it. I contacted my lawyer, Joan, seeking advice. She agreed to issue a statement to the press to alleviate the situation. The statement, issued through her office, expressed our desire for privacy, stating no comment on the rumors about my wife and no future comments. It warned that the media's continued presence outside the house would be actionable if it damaged the family, and requested the trucks to leave. Meanwhile, Detective Asper and her commander announced a press conference for 7 p.m. Watching it, the police disclosed that Mark Stevens had been attacked and executed with a sharp object outside his home. Although a woman was inside the house at the time, there was no indication that she witnessed the attack. The investigation was ongoing. The initial query revolved around the woman's marital status and whether her husband was a suspect. Detective Asper remarked that, given everyone knew her name, it was assumed she was married. He stated a thorough investigation of the husband revealed no indication of his involvement in the attack. In fact, he appeared to have been at home all night. A reporter situated some distance from the scene inquired about other women, particularly married women and their husbands. The police acknowledged systematically investigating claims of Mr. Stevens seducing married women, finding some truth to it. Stevens seemed to have taken several married women while their husbands were present, prompting further investigation. Commander Johnson interrupted, concluding the proceeding, and announced that any additional information would be shared before the Wednesday briefing. The police departed amid shouting. I arranged with the girls' school to have their work delivered or sent electronically for the next few days. I called Linda's parents, advising them to be wary of the press, though none were present, at least for now. They had also vanished from our street. On Tuesday, the doctor called, reporting Linda's responsiveness, and mentioned that the police were with her. I informed her parents and took the girls to the hospital. Upon our arrival, the police were just leaving. Detective Asper expressed a desire to talk to me, and after meeting with her, I agreed. Linda appeared dazed, exchanging greetings with the girls through smiles and hugs, but her acknowledgement of me seemed minimal. The girls provided updates on the TV trucks at school, yet Linda appeared to drift off, prompting the doctor to suggest letting her rest. While her parents conversed with the girls, I engaged in a conversation with Detective Asper. Asper remarked that Linda seemed to be recovering. I responded, stating that maybe she was, but I didn't really know. I asked if he planned to take her home until she fully recovered. Asper mentioned that after her recovery he was sure they would be separated. I suggested he should give her a break and questioned what more punishment she could receive than what had already happened. I clarified that for me it wasn't about punishment, but about respect and trust. I expressed that I would never trust her and I would never respect her, noting that the feeling might be mutual. Asper smiled, suggesting that she might fear me and I might not be trusted either. He accused me of trying to provoke him, stating that he knew I had nothing to do with Stevens's attack. He acknowledged my Army background and formidable reputation in the service, speculating that maybe a regular guy couldn't have done it, but perhaps I could have. I insisted that I didn't, emphasizing that we had home security footage from Stevens' house. Asper dismissed it as not his problem, asserting that he wasn't there and concluded with a veiled threat, saying he'd be seeing me around in the next few days. Linda gradually exhibited more normal behavior. I took the girls daily to visit her, but didn't spend much time in the room with them. On the fourth day, Linda was set to be discharged. She requested a private conversation with me, and I sent the girls out. She apologized for her actions, acknowledging that embarrassing me like that required more than a simple apology. Linda expressed her desire to come home when released. She noted the media presence and their potential disruption to the girls' lives, suggesting she could sneak out. I gave her a long look, stating that she was good at sneaking out. She didn't look up and mentioned checking with security. I acknowledged that I couldn't say I wanted to be around her, but for now, I had little choice. I expressed that I didn't mean for her to be hurt and shared my thoughts on her actions. When asked about whether Stevens had slept with her, Linda replied that they were undressed in bed when the commotion started. I stared at her and knew she was lying. I couldn't say I believed her or would believe anything she told me. Trusting her again was out of the question. I suggested that we see how things go, but made it clear that I couldn't trust her again. Despite all this, I expressed my love for her and walked out. Later, I went to the hospital security office to arrange for a car to pick Linda up behind the building and take her to my house at 4 p.m. The plan went off without a hitch, and she arrived home around 4:45. The kids and her parents were there with me. I had set up a bed in my office for myself while Linda would sleep in our room. The rest of the day was very awkward. Linda, her mom, and the kids played Monopoly in the living room. Her dad and I went to the patio to talk. John asked what I was going to do. I admitted that I didn't really know, but the odds were that we were finished. I encouraged him to try to forgive, emphasizing the long history of love between them and a wonderful family. John expressed doubts about their long-standing love, questioning Linda's actions. He was particularly troubled by the fact that she said they didn't have closeness. I acknowledged her statement but emphasized the uncertainty given the amount of time they spent together. I suggested it might make a difference if protection wasn't used and raised concerns about potential consequences like diseases or pregnancy. John didn't find the thought pleasing and agreed to let Linda stay for the time being, but advised me to find another solution soon. We returned inside, ate pizza, and her parents went home. As far as I knew, they did not discuss the Mark situation with her. While putting the girls to bed, Laura asked Linda why she went to have lovemaking with Mark. Linda apologized, admitting her weakness and wrongdoing. Laura expressed confusion about Mark, stating, "He wasn't there, Daddy," and promised to discuss it later when she knew more. The girls went to bed, and Linda went to the kitchen. I followed about 10 minutes later, making a call to my public defender friend about the autopsy report. He confirmed it was a public document and agreed to get it. Linda, drinking a Pepsi, asked if I would be sleeping in our room. I replied, "No, the office." She welcomed me any time but acknowledged the uncertainty in our future. I expressed skepticism, and she suggested being patient, emphasizing that it all happened in the past week. I climbed up to my office and went to bed, but didn't sleep well. I woke up at 5 a.m., made coffee, and received the autopsy report from my friend. Reading it carefully, especially the analysis of the injuries, it revealed evidence of ejaculate and female secretions on Stephen's penis and scrotum. It seemed Linda had lied about not having closeness, a belief I held due to the timing of her presence at the scene about 2 hours before the attack. When she descended, we got the girls off to school almost like usual. They were a bit subdued, though. While driving them, I spent a good amount of time reviewing my options. If it hadn't been for Linda's illness, I would never have allowed her back into the house. But there were advantages to that, including making things a little easier on the girls if things settled down. Just as I entered the house, another TV truck pulled up outside, and a young woman got out, shouting if Linda was at home and if I had forgiven her. I smiled, waved, and warned her not to come onto the property. I went inside. Linda had made some biscuits and offered me one, which I took. She informed me about the TV truck outside, expressing uncertainty about whether they knew I was there and suggesting that maybe they shouldn't. I inquired about what the TV crew wanted, pointing out that they had already published my name and details about my activities at Mark Stevens' house. Linda questioned if they could cause more damage, and I acknowledged that they probably could think of something. I looked at her, contemplating what to do. She questioned if I meant about her or about us. I clarified that I wanted her to write down exactly what happened last Friday, from when the confrontation occurred until she ended up in the hospital. I suggested it didn't have to be immediate, but I wanted it soon, if possible. Linda agreed to try, acknowledging that it might be traumatic, and mentioned the need to call work to check if she still had a job. I questioned why her job would be at risk for cheating on me, expressing doubt that her workplace would care. She explained she had been off for a week and called her workplace. They allowed her to put the week on sick leave and the next week on vacation time. She then went to her bedroom, typing on her computer. I left her alone and went to my office, where I started researching the autopsy material. I ensured that I would receive the results of the tests done, but it might take a few more days. Despite the situation, Linda seemed to be attempting to behave normally around me. I acknowledged this but believed she must have questions about what happened. Our routine continued for 2 days until I got the test results from the autopsy. Linda's DNA and vaginal secretions were identified on Stephen's penis, so she had indeed lied about the intimacy. I was waiting to see what she wrote to me about what happened, but I just couldn't see continuing life with her as my wife. After dinner the next day, Linda came into my home office. "I finished writing," she said, handing me a printout. I read what she wrote. Linda apologized, expressing regret for her weakness. She recounted the events at the party, explaining that when Mark asked her to dance, she felt thrilled due to his captivating presence and reputation. While dancing, she didn't think of anything else. During a slow number, she found herself at his mercy, pulled to him, and felt his size and hardness. She admitted that at that moment she would have slept with him right there, captivated by his attractiveness. Mark suggested slipping out the side door to go to his place, promising her the sexual experience of her life, a proposition she believed. When the dance ended and I wasn't at our table, she arranged to go to the women's room with Jay. When I returned, she could sense my anger but thought I would get over it in time. Desiring Mark, she went out the side door and they drove to his house. Mark kissed her, carried her upstairs to his bed, and they slept together. She cleaned him and performed another sexual act, but a car alarm interrupted them. Mark left, instructing her to wait. Looking out the window, she couldn't see over the porch roof but noticed someone in black running away and jumping the fence. Linda found a robe, went to the front door, and discovered Mark lying in the driveway with a bashed-in head. She felt guilty, as if it was her fault for sinning. The police arrived and she ended up in the hospital. She apologized for everything, expressing love and confusion about her actions. I looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. She asked if I was the person she saw. I clarified that I was at home all night, drinking and regretting the end of my marriage and the changes that would come to my family. I admitted to having hate, but assured her that the police confirmed my presence with the security tape. She acknowledged what they said, but I interrupted, expressing my belief that Stevens got what he deserved. She disagreed, saying he didn't deserve that, and emphasized that he was nice and had an impact on her life. I replied that we didn't need to go there, stating that I would never be able to love her again, maybe not at all. I pointed out that the person I thought I married would never have done what she did. I questioned if the lovemaking was worth what was lost for both of us. I acknowledged that the lovemaking was spectacular but not worth the consequences. I reflected on the possibility of coming home the next day if things had been different, but with Stevens dead, I felt messed up for good. She affirmed that I executed him and promptly ran out of the room. Under my breath, I muttered that she executed him. Following that, our relationship turned extremely cold. I made a firm decision not to attempt to convince her of my innocence or to mend our relationship in any manner. I also resolved never to admit to her what had transpired, as I assumed that if I did, she would immediately betray my trust to the authorities. She had just admitted that had Stevens not been executed, her reckless night would have been worth facing the consequences. Maybe not in those words, but still. I filed for divorce a few weeks later. I asked for custody of the kids so they could stay in the house. Linda still had her job, so I asked for no alimony, but also no child support and liberal visitation. Linda had recovered sufficiently that I insisted she move out. She went to stay with her parents, and I had her served there. Soon after, her father called. He wanted me to withdraw the papers, saying Linda was distraught. I told him that she deserved to be distraught, and that she should get a lawyer. He was quite angry, but I didn't know if he was angry with me or her. He inquired about visitation, and I informed him that she could come over any night and stay until the kids went to bed. Linda visited the next day at 5. I had prepared macaroni and cheese, and we ate with the girls. We played board games with them and put them to bed. After that, Linda expressed a desire to talk, but I declined. She insisted that we needed to work things out for the sake of the girls, suggesting that they would have to adjust if we were apart. She proposed finding a place where they could visit, emphasizing that the sooner we worked out the divorce, the sooner I could have a visitation schedule. She pleaded, expressing regret for her mistake and professing her love. I rejected the idea, stating that there was no way we would stay married after her open involvement with that man. I made it clear that it was time to move on. Linda began to tear up, quietly crying. Despite feeling some sympathy, I was not sorry enough to change my mind. Our marriage was over. The divorce went through, we worked out a joint custody agreement, and Linda had an apartment with a big second bedroom for the girls. The two of us settled into a distant but amicable relationship focused on the girls. After about 4 months, I began to date women from our circle and from work, who knew that I was unattached and seemed to be interested. When Linda had the girls, I brought several women home for the night. None of them lasted too long though, but the lovemaking was usually good and sometimes great. I stayed away from married women, although some of them seemed anxious to be with me. After my experience, I thought it immoral to do that. Linda was good with the girls, but not so good by herself. She was taking antidepressants and sleeping a lot, but she managed to go to work and do her job. I was told by her parents and the girls that she was not dating. 10 years on, Shelley went off to college today and Laura was set to go into her junior year. The two of them had gotten used to the joint custody arrangement and seemed to do quite well. They both dated in high school and, presumably, in college for Laura. I've had a long-term relationship with a younger woman named Cody, whom I met at a bar one night. Like me, she was divorced with 2 children at home, and her husband had moved to the West Coast. We met when she was 35, and her kids were in high school, twins in their sophomore year, heading off to college. She and I moved in together at my house. I loved her, she was lively and smart, and the love-making was great. While she might not have been as much of a beauty as Linda, she was pretty, and guys paid attention to her when we went out. I informed her early on about all the commotion surrounding Mark Stevens' passing, without revealing how he had died. The publicity eventually subsided, and no one was ever arrested or charged. One Saturday, Detective Logan showed up at my house, and I invited him in. I was home alone. He mentioned his recent retirement and expressed his happiness about the good pension. I congratulated him and asked why he was there. He admitted that he had become convinced I executed the man, adding that the man deserved it, though maybe not my wife. I denied any involvement, and Logan congratulated whoever did it. I questioned why he thought Linda didn't deserve it. Logan explained that it was just one night, and Linda did what many married women might do when someone came on to them. He suggested that if it had been a discreet meeting, perhaps we could have gotten over it, but it was too in our face. I inquired about his partner, and he shared that she was now a captain, a real go-getter. We shook hands and he left. Regarding Linda, she eventually made a partial recovery. We rode together when I took Shelley to school. On the way back, I asked about her well-being. Linda mentioned she was okay and had a boyfriend, somewhat like a friend with benefits. I confirmed that Cody and I were together, and we might move in together once her kids went off to school. Linda whispered that she wished none of it had happened, expressing regret for the missed opportunity to be empty nesters and have some real fun. She apologized, and we both ended up crying. Later, she moved into her friend's apartment, but I didn't think she ever fully recovered from that night, and perhaps I hadn't either. I admitted to never regretting dealing with the man, believing it might have saved many marriages an effective, altruistic deed.
Story 2.
I encountered Lena, my wife of nearly 15 years, during high school. The subsequent Monday, after hosting a party at my parents' farm for my friends, I requested a family friend working for us to procure a couple of bottles of sour mashed potato. My cousin Terry, not accustomed to being drunk for long at his age, decided to head home instead of recovering. Although I successfully retrieved the truck keys from him, he believed he outsmarted me. This idiot emerged from the front door, thinking he could walk the 5 miles to his house, and I allowed it. Reportedly, a young woman discovered him about a mile away, crawling through gutters while fetching the family mail, as he couldn't stand on his feet anymore. That's how I messed up before he left my parents' house. After involving her principled father, she transported my cousin to his parents' house. My aunt, my father's sister, had to deal with his multiple bouts of vomiting due to his foolishness. My parents learned about it, and I faced repercussions. In their view, I had betrayed their trust and was a horse's back. Regardless of my explanations, they believed the worst. Eventually, my aunt exaggerated the incident, portraying it as the worst thing humanity could do. I was in a tough spot. If only she knew the truth about her son's behavior. Nothing can be done when a person is blinded by faith and can't see reality. I accepted it and served my time. I realized early on that the truth doesn't matter most of the time. What matters is what people believe. From then on, I altered my attitude toward everyone I knew. My father used to say that I had aged prematurely because my walk changed. One day, an unfamiliar young woman approached me in the hallway before class after lunch. She expressed concern about wild parties at my parents' farm, alleging the presence of half-undressed girls and questioning my responsibility. I responded by asking her identity and the reason for her accusations. Lena LeBlanc introduced herself and mentioned finding a man from my parties in a ditch near her parents' house. I considered how far from the truth her perception was, but refrained from correcting her, mindful of the potential impact on my reputation in our small town of Jackson. I assured her that the situation wasn't as bad as she thought, avoiding any correction to her misconceptions. Instead, I invited her to join the next Saturday night party. Lena blushed, insisting she wasn't that kind of girl. I playfully remarked that maybe she wasn't, but she seemed interested. I continued to observe her body language, suggesting that her actions contradicted her words. She called me a horse's back, and I replied that it was true, but horses' asses were meant to be ridden hard. I quipped that she should let me know when she's up for it. She slapped me and stormed off, but I caught a glimpse of a smile before she slapped me. I chuckled, realizing my reputation for the year was already established. My cousin Terry, who witnessed the entire incident, mentioned that her words had made me one of the most popular in the educational institution that year. I responded that she had no idea about anything. Terry asked what I said to her, and I brushed it off, not bothering to explain. After smoking a joint each, I laughed because Terry was unaware that I had put the deck on the line. With that said, we headed to our first class, initiating a game between me and Lena. I played with Lena every opportunity I got, extracting everything I could from her. Whenever I saw her in public, I made it clear to anyone watching that I was undressing her with my eyes. This behavior became so noticeable that one of her friends would play the song Hungry Eyes on her cell phone when she spotted me. A way for me to get revenge for Lena LeBlanc punching me in the face. Yeah, I was being an idiot, but I enjoyed it. Additionally, she had an irresistible body. I was just a fool, honest enough to admit it. If one of her friends asked me what I was doing, I would honestly say, I'm interested in her. However, Lena declared we'd have a relationship when hell freezes over, and until then, I should respect her wishes. This only fueled Lena's frustration, as her friends wanted to know what I had done to provoke such a reaction. When she explained it to them, they either laughed at the situation or teased her about her response. Lena LeBlanc was attractive in my eyes, a red-haired Cajun from the deep south with a body that haunted my dreams. Standing at about 5'6" inches, she was tight, sweet, with curves in all the right places. If she got upset outside of educational institution, she could unleash a stream of swear words in Cajun French at a mile a minute. Okay, I'll admit it. I enjoyed seeing her get upset. When her friends informed her about my actions, the smile on my face Seeing her blush over comments about our situations revealed that I was enjoying it. I added to that when she wore a low-cut blouse displaying her cleavage, releasing a long, hungry wolf cry that echoed through the hallways. Everyone noticed Lena had put on something that made her look really good, and for the rest of the day, every guy clamored to check her out. I don't know if she enjoyed the attention, but I found it amusing. Numerous times I caught myself gazing at her enticing little horseshoe-shaped rear with a beautiful 36S rack, a narrow waist, and 34 hips. There wasn't a single coital act I didn't imagine doing with her. At times, I fantasized about taking her into the hayloft in my parents' barn, although I never hoped it would lead anywhere because her family was affluent, and mine was not. She possessed the spirit of a wild horse yet to be tamed, if that was possible. Depending on her mood, she could be passive-aggressive or dominant. A man attempting to win her over would need the patience of Job, as it would take a long time to understand her before devising a plan to get into her clothes. The more I studied her, the more I realized how complex her personality was. That's how much her hot body and personality turned me on. If any woman could give me a blue balls attack, it was her. There were moments when she would catch my eye when no one else noticed, doing something to tease me. We both played this game intentionally to frustrate each other. It took almost the entire educational institution year before we both realized how effective it was. Everyone knew I was an buttocks lover, and nothing in my eyes was better than what Lena wore on her frame. Once, catching me ogling 3 of her friends, she leaned over and wiggled their asses while laughing. Apparently, her mother had told her that men attracted to asses turned out to be the most faithful husbands, a belief that spread through the entire educational institution after she shared it with Flat Karen. We were both set to graduate 12th grade with honors. She became valedictorian, and I secured the second spot. She believed that if my extracurricular activities were known, I wouldn't be considered at all. Rehearsing for our graduation ceremony roles on the auditorium stage a month away, I was to be there in case she fell ill. I knew she'd come regardless, even out of spite. There was no way she'd let me win by default. Both recipients of substantial educational grants, our last high educational institution dance was that upcoming Saturday. In the fall, I planned to attend Southeast Missouri University to pursue a master's degree in agricultural science. Leaving the stage through back stairs leading down the hallway, I ran my hand over her soft rear end, whispering, "When will you be ready to let me knock on it?" Turning around, she slapped me, saying, "When hell freezes over, fool." When there was nothing to lose and no witnesses, I became a bit aggressive. Frustrated, I pulled her close and, lowering my head, looked into her eyes. Initially resistant, I persevered with unwavering determination, recognizing it as my sole opportunity to make a move. Her eyes widened as I brought my mouth close, initiating a forceful, deep French kiss with intensity, claiming her mouth as my own. Injecting the kiss with passion and desire, I decided that if I was paying the price, I deserved to extract every ounce of satisfaction. It was to be my first and perhaps only kiss with her, and I aimed to make it unforgettable. After savoring the taste I longed for, I released her to gauge her reaction. Expecting a passionate or frustrated response, I was surprised when she forcefully pinned me against the wall, matching my aggression and turning the situation thrilling. Another deep, lingering kiss followed, revealing her assertive side. Our bodies melded together as she grabbed my lap, showcasing her assertiveness, and the recognition of size added intensity to the charged atmosphere. Lena expressed that she had been waiting for this for most of the educational institution year, mentioning that she was glad I finally decided to be a man. She wished I had told her that months ago and requested that I loosen my grip. I responded, stating that I wouldn't until she agreed to exclusivity. She firmly replied, "Deal. You've been the only one I've looked at since you slapped me." I smiled and brought my mouth to hers again. This time, I revealed my tender side, kissing her softly and deliberately. My hands firmly rested on the softness of her cheeks, feeling like I held a piece of heaven. Our kisses were both demanding and open, with Lena exploring my figure. Leaving the landing a few minutes later, thinking we heard a noise, we held hands, realizing our relationship had taken a big step forward outside educational institution. The heightened mutual attraction during the educational institution year intensified our feelings. Those who saw us leave immediately noticed the smiles on our faces, sparking discussions in the corridors for the rest of the day. It was amusing because neither of us had dated that year, seemingly waiting for each other. I waited for her at the educational institution entrance, and without saying a word, she handed me the educational institution book she was talking to at home. Lena suggested stopping at the Dairy Queen for a milkshake before I dropped her off at home. Karen was shocked, exclaiming if Lena and I were finally admitting our interest in each other. Lena assured her that she would call later that night to explain everything. We walked out of the house holding hands, heading for my Jeep Cherokee Sport. At the Dairy Queen, she wanted a Blizzard, and I wanted a regular shake, so I ordered both in the largest size. In the city park, at one of the picnic tables, we started getting to know each other. Around 6 in the evening, I dropped her off at her parents' house. Her mother opened the door for her, and her father, shocked by my respectful approach, eventually gave his consent for me to take his daughter to the dance on Saturday night. He appreciated the respect, considering it a testament to my upbringing. Years later, when I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, he didn't object, as long as I followed his plans to protect his assets. After Lena went into her parents' house, I headed to my parents' farm. My parents sensed a change in my life, and when questioned, I mentioned an interesting conversation. Privately, my dad asked about the redhead I invited to the educational institution dance on Saturday night. From that day on, Lena and I were inseparable. It was Saturday, the day my parents went into town. I was in the hayloft, preparing to haul a few bales of straw after cleaning out 4 stalls with the loader on the front of the tractor. I did this once a month, usually on the first Saturday of the month. The horses were in the paddock in the pasture. I carried everything to the edge of the loft and was just getting ready to spread them out on the floor of the stalls when I heard Lena's voice calling me. "I'm here," I said. "I have 14 more bales to drop before I go down." I started throwing them over the side as fast as I could and was about ready to climb down when I saw Lena's head sticking out above the floor. I went over to greet her as she finished her climb. It was funny how much flat space was open in the straw bales. A moment later, we were lying with our arms around each other on bales of straw. Our mouths were closed, and our hands were exploring each other's bodies. She, like me, was eager to get up from where we stood on the stairs. It wasn't long before she was pulling off my shirt, and I had just finished undoing the buttons of her blouse, anticipating how I would feel her beautiful chest when we were interrupted. Lena and I probably would have gotten carried away if we hadn't heard my parents honking. I noticed my parents trying to grab my attention. As we descended the stairs, they were already approaching the barn. Lena and I swiftly spread out the straw in the stalls. In one of the stalls, Mom and Dad caught us throwing straw at each other, and laughter ensued. Curiosity led my parents to the barn, prompted by the sight of a strange car in the yard when I wasn't around. They were pleasantly surprised to find a pretty girl about my age visiting the farm. It was intriguing to observe the surprise on my parents' faces when I introduced Lena to them as my girlfriend. I informed them that as soon as I finished bedding the floor, I would saddle the horses and take her for a ride. Mom suggested having lunch first, and Lena volunteered to help. They headed toward the house, prompting my father to commend my quick thinking and advise me not to jeopardize this new relationship. "Lena is better company, just like your mother was at the same age," he said. "Make sure she's good enough to be the mother of your children if you're considering it." My father, a practical man, offered straightforward thoughts, emphasizing the consequences of our actions. I learned then that he always had a fondness for redheads. Dad assisted me in setting up the 4 horse stalls before returning to the house. By the time we got back, Mom and Lena had already become friends. After lunch, we went for a horseback ride, reaching the back 50 after tying the horses to a low branch. Finding new spots on the grass by the swimming pond, we leaned against a tree. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Lena left to get ready for the educational institution dance. While dancing that night, Terry overheard Lena telling Karen that my sweet and gentle personality attracted her. Despite our teasing, we never took it further. Lena explained to Karen and Terry that she appreciates my ability to control my temper. "Jet can be aggressive when needed," she said. "His passive nature guides him in everything, but when he sets his mind to something, no one can make him back down. Waiting for me like I was the only one proved that," she added. "Terry attested to my loyalty, saying he'd do anything for me, just as I would for him." Piss him off, and you'll realize you underestimated him. More than one boy here crossed him, and after he dealt with them, they were lying on the ground in blood. When I picked her up for the last dance of the educational institution year, her parents were surprised when I brought her a corsage without a special occasion. They said it was the most beautiful bouquet they had ever seen. I explained that I made it from plants in a small nursery my father and I had started on the farm. I made it in neutral colors, so it goes with anything, I said. They seemed very impressed. She looked stunning in that white summer dress, emphasizing her curves. All night I thought about her. There was no doubt in everyone's mind that we were now a couple. Yeah, she was a real tease to me, and she knew it. I think she was irritating me that night, kind of paying me back for what we'd done to each other during the educational institution year. Toward the end of the summer, we spent a lot of time in the hayloft. Mom and I had a long conversation after she found my stash of contraceptives hidden in a far drawer. It was then that she decided to have a conversation with the woman she hoped would be her future daughter-in-law. I must have realized what was said, because shortly afterward, Lena informed me that she was taking birth control pills. One night at dinner, Mom put in her 2 cents, saying, "The horses seem to like the stalls better, and they've gotten much sharper in the pasture. I wonder if it might be because the straw has taken on a new odor." I almost choked on my food and started coughing, and my dad looked up and said I missed something. My father recognized my early interest in gardening and fostered its growth. Under his guidance, we transformed 20 acres of our 250-acre farm into a Christmas tree farm, acquiring small trees inexpensively through a reforestation grant. After identifying the best tree type for the Christmas market, every spring break, my father and I spent a week planting rows of new seedlings, creating a special bonding time for us. About 2 weeks before planting, we tilled the plot, repeating this process 3 or 4 times, depending on the weather, before leveling it. This facilitated quick and easy planting, allowing us to promote our first crop well before sale the following season. With approximately 400 trees standing at 80 feet tall, the remaining task was pruning them to perfection for retail buyers. We even devised a labeling system for buyers to know the farm of origin. In 6th grade, my father, acknowledging my passion for growing plants, emphasized the need to replenish topsoil. An arrangement with the city of Jackson involved bringing collected yard waste to a designated site for mass topsoil production. Cape Girardeau adopted a similar practice, and from an early age, at least twice a month, I spent a day or two creating mulch by chopping up twigs, filtering out non-biodegradable items burned in oil drums. The ashes were scattered along the plot boundary for a cleaner end product. Once the pile reached a certain size, we added chemicals to stimulate the rotting process and maintain moisture. Turning the heap over once or twice a month ensured proper aeration. Local building contractors learned they could dump excess soil without a removal fee. Mostly Missouri red clay, we mixed this soil with our biodegradable mulch, leading this side of our growing business to claim quite a few acres. After topsoil removal, some of the donated soil was used to level and grade the land for our greenhouses. It took 18 months to transform useless dirt into high-quality topsoil, used for bedding in our greenhouses and sold to the retail market in 10-pound bags. In the first 3 years, enough profit was made to build 2 large glass greenhouses, heated in winter with gas furnaces, filled with growing flowers shipped to local wholesalers as needed. Implementing a system of PCP tubing and an expanding hose, we designed an automatic watering system hanging from the top down, applying the same principles to water our crops. A drainage system built by my father on the concrete floor collected excess water for reuse. This efficient approach saved on costs and eliminated the need for a pond to collect excess fertilizer from watering. During the summer, we constructed an additional 4 greenhouses to cultivate white and red poinsettias for Christmas, eventually reaching a total of 10. Recognizing the money earned through our collaborative efforts, my father decided I could graduate without incurring debt. I vividly recall Lena's initial exposure to our operation, which aided her comprehension of why I selected this career path. My father conveyed that my inquisitive nature played a pivotal role in bringing this business to fruition. He noted that I was asking questions, prompting family discussions. Following conversations with my wife and securing her approval, the family embarked on this venture, now a significant and steadily growing source of income. Inquiring about the farm's previous use, Lena asked. My father explained it formerly raised beef, influenced by market fluctuations. By my graduation, we boasted 22 greenhouses, each 240 feet long, 40 feet wide, and 9 feet high. Weekly, we delivered high-quality organic produce. Responding to increased demand, we expanded further, with 2 greenhouses dedicated to leaf lettuce, 2 to bok choy, and 2 to English cucumbers. Employing 20 individuals, our chemical-free organic produce commanded higher prices from wholesalers, ensuring our financial prosperity. As anticipated, I joined the family business full-time, while Lena pursued a career as a family nurse practitioner associated with Southeast Missouri Hospital. I proposed to her within a week of her receiving her license, and 3 months later, we hastily married due to her pregnancy with our daughter. Our 2 sons arrived a year apart from our wedding day. Spoiled by my parents, Lena was cherished, with my mother becoming our children's nanny, giving her a renewed sense of purpose. To this day, our children reflect the morals and values she instilled in them. Celebrating our 14th anniversary, my cousin Terry and his wife Karen expressed concerns about our relationship, suggesting Lena appeared to dominate and control me. At a family barbecue, they confronted me, asserting that Lena treated me as a second-class citizen, displaying a motherly fatigue in the relationship. Despite my attempts to defend Lena, they insisted that I had stopped listening to her, causing resentment. According to Terry, Lena was leveraging my softer personality to assert dominance, and some friends suspected she harbored a romantic interest outside our marriage. Reflecting on these comments, I confronted Lena about her treatment, expressing fatigue from being treated like a doormat. This revelation shocked her, making her feel out of place for the first time in a while. Luna, my 13-year-old daughter, questioned my father, asking him what had gotten into him. I responded loudly for everyone to hear, stating that I had reached a point where I could no longer tolerate the feeling that her mother was treating me like a servant. I warned that if her mother didn't change her attitude, our house would be turbulent for months. This statement served as an awakening for everyone present. I realized that, for most of our married life, I had turned a blind eye because it wasn't worth fighting over. I allowed my wife to walk over me like a doormat, without resistance. That night, Lena and I had a significant argument, something that had been brewing for a long time. I ended up sleeping on the couch. Towards the end of our argument, Lena remarked that I just didn't know how extra I was. That's when I lost control. We were fighting outside, away from the kids' hearing. Driven by anger, I grabbed Lena, turned her over my knee, and spanked her, a method I had used with our children for misbehavior. She went into the bedroom in tears with a very red bottom, locking the door to prevent my entry. To say that Lena was tiptoeing around me the next morning is an understatement. Lena had just been confronted with a new reality. When my wife and kids left home the next morning, I returned from the large office near the greenhouses to investigate. As I lay on the couch, contemplating when the change in our marriage began, it struck me that it was 8 years ago, a couple of months after my mother's pass away. After conducting a thorough search of her bedroom, I found a wrist bracelet with custom-made 18-karat gold charms. The issue was, I hadn't bought them for her. The charms were so sensual that she could never wear them in public. I knew they must have been custom-made to order by her lover due to their significant expense. I quietly pocketed it to take with me, wanting it to be acknowledged. This discovery lent credence to Karen and Terry's suspicions. Returning to my office, I kept quiet when questioned about it. I mentioned that I had a lot on my mind, which was true. Around 3 p.m, with an office staff member present, I asked her to call the group my wife was in to inquire if they were accepting new clients. Fiona inquired for personal reasons, asking why I wanted to know. I explained that I needed to check my wife's actual work schedule, as some rumors had come to my attention that I needed to prove were not true. Fiona commented as she walked out the door that finally, someone had the courage to tell me what they had been hearing for months. Fiona, Karen's sister and a military widow, had joined our company while her husband was in the service. She was now raising her daughter alone. I often wondered why she couldn't find another man. Fiona was the complete opposite of her sister and beautiful. In all the years of our marriage, my wife was the only woman who had caught my attention. However, After seeing what Fiona had to offer in terms of femininity, I realized I was still young enough to start over. The freedom of knowing I had another choice brought peace to my state of mind. Although I had known her for years, thanks to Terry and Karen, I hadn't paid much attention to her. For some reason, I experienced the excitement of the unknown again, an amazing feeling. When she returned, the information she provided was quite revealing. Her work schedule was not at all what I had envisioned. Instead of working Thursdays and Fridays until 10 p.m. every week, she only did it once a month. Like all the other doctors in their office, Fiona and I chatted for quite a few minutes. She attempted to pose questions subtly, avoiding clarity in her inquiries. Whether she was aware of it or not, she instilled a few thoughts in my mind that fostered hope for my future. This afforded her a significant amount of unaccounted-for time. It was surprising to discover that she only worked half a day on Wednesdays. Now the question arose, what was she doing with all that free time? 8 years ago, when a tragic accident befell my mother, my father and I were startled to learn that she had bequeathed her shares in the family business to me, entrusting them to her 3 grandchildren. During my childhood, they had sold most of the farm at an inflated price to a corporation, retaining 10 acres around the house in their name and another 10 in mine. The corporation paid off the mortgage for 10 years with interest. They gifted me the land as a wedding present from Lena and me, and on that land, Lena and I constructed our house. My father took his wife's loss hard and withdrew from society for a few months afterward. During that period, I assumed the role of the company's president, and my father retired as our first CEO, though he still came in 3 mornings a week to stay updated and serve as an advisor. I was aware of an impending significant business trip in a couple of weeks, during which I would have to visit 8 different company offices to renew multi-year contracts requiring my signature. These contracts included product line extensions, providing opportunities to increase revenue. As it involved 3 countries, I had to be away for at least 3 weeks. My father and I continued to lead our company, now employing over 100 people, with more than 48 greenhouses operating at maximum capacity. Fortunately, in my first year of full-time employment, I conducted a survey to identify potential underground water veins and found one that would sustain us for years. By discontinuing the county water supply, we reduced our total expenses by $10,000 per month. Additionally, we uncovered a vast natural gas cavity. Since the land had been in the family for generations, we still owned the mineral rights. Through negotiations with major companies, we secured a mutually beneficial arrangement. Even after covering our heating costs, we received a substantial monthly royalty. My cousin Terry, serving as our CFO, visited my office to brief me on the latest cash flow statement, revealing that we were on track for the most significant year of growth in the company's history. During this private meeting, I disclosed my discovery to him. Examining the report, he was as astounded as I was. Terry inquired about my plans, asking what I intended to do. I replied that I wouldn't send someone else to sign the contracts. Instead, I planned to pretend I had no idea what was going on. I explained that this would give the private investigators I was going to hire plenty of time to find out who my wife's lover is. Terry questioned the relevance of finding out in a 50 state like ours, suggesting it wouldn't matter in divorce court. I remarked that Lena's father, Leonard LeBlanc, was and still is a conniving person. Before Lena and I were married, he made us sign a prenuptial agreement, and I guessed Lena forgot about it. Terry asked why he did it, wondering if Leonard LeBlanc was worth millions, thanks to fracking, to protect his daughter from me ever getting a piece of her inheritance. I responded, stating that if we divorce because of infidelity, the guilty party walks away with the clothes, and that's the end of it. Upon arriving home that evening, my demeanor had notably shifted. My wife appeared to show a respect for me that had been absent for years. It seemed evident to both of us that our relationship had undergone a significant change. Lena was undoubtedly attempting to discern what I might be aware of. An interesting note was that same morning, my father had opted for a 2-week fishing trip with childhood friends, a plan they had encouraged for years. He'd be away until my return. Throughout his absence, Lena had been home more frequently, sparking suspicions that something undisclosed was occurring in his life. A few days later, my daughter informed me that her mother was frantically searching for something and questioning all three children about it. "Daddy, Mom accused us of going into your bedroom and going through her dresser drawers," Luna said, noting the emotional weight attached to what her mother sought. Upon my return home, I inquired about it, but Lena downplayed its significance. When I mentioned our daughter's concern, Lena suggested that Luna might have misunderstood, planning to clarify after dinner. That night during dinner, I regarded Lena similarly to how I had during our school days, prompting a significant change in her mood. I presumed Lena now believed I was aware of her affair. Post-dinner, as she put the boys to bed, my daughter questioned me about the situation. "Luna, I'm not sure," I said. "People have informed me of something, and if it's true, things are going to get a lot worse around here for a while, because it's going to take your parents a while to sort it out. Just remember that this situation didn't arise because of your behavior or your brother's behavior. It's been 3 weeks since I discovered the bracelet with all the charms on it. The 16 charms were valued at $8,000 each. The platinum used in the bracelet, along with the gold, put the chain at $20,000. Whoever gave her this piece of jewelry, it was made by one of the most famous jewelers in the jewelry business. Since all the charms were unique, they were bought to commemorate special moments or events in these two's relationship. If you figure that she received 2 charms a year, perhaps for her birthday and anniversary, that works out to about 8 years. Reluctant to accept it, the circumstantial evidence pointed toward a direction I refused to consider. That's why I adjusted my schedule to acquire what I needed. I booked a hotel room in St. Louis to receive a full report from private investigators before proceeding with my business. There, my fears were confirmed. My wife's lover, for almost 8 years, was a man I had known all my life. The private investigators handed me a written copy and a flash drive with the recorded evidence. After the gentleman departed with full payment, I perused the comprehensive report, finding it so detailed that I wondered how I didn't become physically ill. Fortunately, on my way back from Canada, I purchased a couple of bottles of scotch at the duty-free store and consumed more than a couple of strong shots while reviewing the report. Summoning my courage, I contacted my former father, Leonard LeBlanc, and requested his personal email account. Leonard, a proud man with his values, faced the personal distress caused by this report. Yet I knew that if I didn't disclose the truth, he would assist Leonard in undermining me during our divorce. I explained to Leonard that I wanted him to know what's in store for him because he wouldn't believe it if he heard it from me. I mentioned that the dossier was handed to me about 2 hours ago and cost me $6,000 to get. When I received the letter, I sent it to him via my laptop and awaited the imminent phone call. Leonard LeBlanc might have appeared to be the epitome of Homer Pyle upon initial acquaintance. Standing over 6'50" tall, he exhibited the same clumsiness and awkwardness as everyone else. In his childhood, he was the son of a fortunate alligator hunter who amassed wealth. Despite his unassuming demeanor and simple language, he conveyed the impression of a dull-witted person. Many were deceived, underestimating the genius he concealed from most. When intrigued, he delved into thorough research, starting from the ground level. CEOs were often astonished to discover, after sealing a challenging deal, that he had only been with their company for 6 months. While leading the corporation, he possessed the knowledge to enhance their profitability and productivity by exploiting their vulnerabilities, potentially saving millions from their initial costs. As soon as my cell phone rang, I answered, anticipating it to be my father-in-law. Leonard exclaimed, expressing his surprise at the situation, admitting that if I had told him, he would have called. He characterized me as the biggest liar in the country and questioned how much worse things were going to get from there. I asserted that I planned to do the same thing to them as he did, stating there would be no mercy for either of them. Leonard replied, expressing understanding and absolving me of blame, stating that he'd burn anyone for what they've done. He requested that I promise not to do anything before we talk, and assured me that our words wouldn't be recorded. Leonard LeBlanc, a religious man with his own views on life and morality, garnered respect for steadfastly maintaining his principles. I suggested to my dad that we go fishing with the boys the first Sunday after I get home, and that he could call my daughter to arrange it tonight if she'll be home. He liked the idea, seeing it as an opportunity to eliminate 2 birds with 1 stone. He wanted to know what made me suspicious. I explained that I found a bracelet with a bunch of charms on it, had it appraised, and discovered it was custom-made. Last Monday, while in Montreal, I arranged to have it shipped to my wife from Paris. It would be sent by courier one piece at a time to arrive at her workplace with a note. I planned to contact my father-in-law and his lover at the appropriate time, so they could find out the cost of my silence. All 16 pieces must be in her possession before I return home. Leonard expressed concern, anticipating that my wife and her lover would turn into lunatics. I replied, explaining that it would give me time to find a buyer for my shares in the corporation. Selling my father's dream was the only thing that could hurt him as much as it hurt me, throwing them off balance psychologically for the near future. Leonard understood the plan, and I continued, stating that their fears would become more apparent as the date of my return approached. Leonard inquired about the remaining duration of my trip, and I replied that I had 2 more weeks to live out of a suitcase. From the day the first courier letter hit my wife's eyes, they would be the walking dead. I remarked that it would have been easier if they were actually dead, suggesting a less complicated resolution. After he hung up the phone, I relaxed, knowing Leonard LeBlanc wouldn't wait for anyone. Hailing from the swamps, he knew how to resolve a matter without unnecessary questions. In the heart of New York City, staying at the Trump Hotel, I received the detective's unwelcome news while still at my desk well after 9 p.m. My father was dead, and I was shocked. I had to inquire about the details of what had happened. Evidently, my wife and he chose to take a swim in the rear section of the pond where Lena and I had spent considerable time. On the initial Wednesday afternoon we started dating, when the kids were at school, they opted for a horseback ride to cool off. Dad got there before Lena due to the hot weather. Local authorities suspected that someone had introduced a pet alligator a couple of years ago, which had adapted to its new habitat. Divers found my father's body after they eliminated the alligator. All 3 of us grasped the circumstances. Lena, my wife, was physically undamaged, but grappling with significant emotional distress. Our children stayed with their grandparents until my wife regained control of the situation. Returning to my table, I shared the recent revelation with those still present, then excused myself to attend to personal matters. While walking back to my room, I pondered the consequences of being on Leonard LeBlanc's bad side. I wondered about his plans for his daughter. After a stiff drink, I placed a call, and Leonard promptly answered. I began by asking about the kids. Dad said in slang that it was fair enough for the midlines, indicating that the kids were upset, but within what he considered normal for their age. I asked if I could speak with them if they were up, and he handed me the cell phone. I spent the next hour talking to all 3 kids before returning the phone to Grandpa. According to what Lena managed to explain, Leonard mentioned that my father drowned as an alligator dragged him away. They found his undressed body with several dead animals in the refrigerator. While his body wasn't bitten, it had a few scratches, so he recommended a closed casket. I thanked Dad solemnly and informed him that I would be home Saturday morning to handle the funeral arrangements. I mentioned that I needed to call my wife and check on her. He remarked that it sounded good, stating that at times like this, one has to keep up appearances. Before saying goodbye, I called Lena, and reports indicated she was in serious condition. Conversing with her was challenging as she couldn't stop crying. She couldn't fathom how they hadn't spotted an alligator before, given their weekly horseback rides. I questioned if it was typical for them to swim undressed, and Lena couldn't bear it, dropping the call. Now she knew I was aware of the truth. The following morning, during a business meeting, the same 2 detectives from the previous night called me in. After my wife fainted while grieving and tried to drown her sorrows, a gas explosion occurred, flurry out part of the house. She didn't escape in time and was fatally crushed by debris. I requested to expedite the process due to my need to fly out urgently. Fortunately, they understood, and I secured a better deal than anticipated. I managed to catch the last plane to the Cape that evening. Stepping off the 12-seater plane, I found my father-in-law waiting. Dad said that my wife and he were counting on me and the grandchildren to stay with them until things were settled. This would give me time to get things organized and settled. I inquired about how Mom was handling it, and Dad revealed that she struggled, until the police informed them this afternoon that she was your father's longtime mistress. Their suspicions were confirmed when they discovered blackmail notes Lena had been receiving in your father's office. I remarked that it must have bothered them. Dad added that it was a bracelet with 16 different erotic charms, all undressed, suggesting it could be seen as a model of what lovers did in those days. Of course, they planned to talk to me after the funeral. I asked how I should arrange to meet them, and Dad suggested a simple plan. I should take the prenup and the private investigator's report with me and give them to them right away. It would prove that I had no motive to frame them. I smiled, knowing he said it to remind me that all passaways, until proven one way or another, would be treated as suspicious. The more candid I was about them, the less chance they would consider it a homicide. Dad and I went to the funeral home office together to select a casket. We settled on a closed casket for both of them. I then contacted Terry at the office, informing him that the contracts were signed, and I would be taking a few days off. There was a considerable turnout at the funeral and tea party for the lovebirds. Considering everything, I believe my kids handled it well. I maintained my composure as much as possible, though there were moments when I couldn't hide my emotions. Many speculated about a closer than usual relationship between the two, but nothing was publicly mentioned about it. The detectives patiently waited while the fire inspectors finalized a report on the gas explosion at my house. They determined the cause to be a faulty installation conducted while I was away. Upon receiving the report, I could legally sue the gas company for negligent passaway and loss of home. They found no evidence to determine when the alligator was placed in the pond. Presenting the prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's report, I gave them a copy using my father-in-law's printer. They appreciated my disclosure, resolving any potential issues that might arise upon others reviewing their final report. While sitting on the back patio with Lena's father and enjoying cold beer, he mentioned that he and his wife planned to change their will, leaving everything to the kids in a living trust controlled by me until they reach the age of 30. I responded that it doesn't matter if he had anything to do with what happened, stating that karma has given them what they deserve and we should leave it at that. Leonard smiled and complimented me, saying that he always knew I was a smart man who knew what to say when it was needed. At Macy's, where the kids and I were making significant purchases, Fiona ran into me. We had moved into my dad's house during the remodel of mine, which was stale and desperately needed repair. I explained to Fiona that we were buying things because we had nothing left and introduced her to my 3 children, Luna, Leon, and Levi. We decided to start with the boys, figuring out their preferences and dislikes, gathering enough underwear, t-shirts, blue jeans, shirts, jackets, and other clothes to last 2 weeks. After paying for our selections, I made 6 trips to the car, utterly exhausted by the end, including the last trip involving new shoes. The children suggested that Fiona should come with us to our temporary home, and then she could return with me to help pick out a new closet. Fiona hesitated, expressing that she didn't want me to think she's meddling in things that don't concern her. Luna firmly stated that she thought I should go with Fiona and then take her out to dinner to show how much we appreciate her help. That's precisely what we did. After dropping the kids off and unloading everything, Fiona and I returned, working for a total of 4 hours. I invited her for dinner, and she mentioned that she had called Luna to get her agreement and made arrangements on her cell phone to have their favorite pizza delivered. When I got home, the big question surfaced. Daddy, are you going to ask her out on a real date? And that remains a question yet to be answered.
Story 3.
My parents excluded me from our Christmas family postcard, saying my wheelchair would ruin the photo, but included my adopted brother instead, leaving me heartbroken. I, 17, female, have a younger brother, Nathan, 15, male. And I always had this feeling that my parents preferred him over me. Nathan is adopted. My parents adopted him around 9 years ago, but he fits right in with our family. In fact, I would even say that he looks more like a part of my family and like the kind of child that my parents should have than I do. I'm not saying this because I want to, but because my parents have joked about this several times. I feel like they really don't mean it as a joke. My family is really conventionally attractive, and I'm not even kidding, they could be on the cover of some family magazine. I, unfortunately, don't really fit in. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a kid, and that made it very difficult for me to lose weight. My parents tried to control my portions, and whatever I consumed was strictly monitored by them, but that's no way to live, and I used to literally have to eat in secret because it genuinely felt like they were starving me. It was already very difficult for me to maintain a healthy weight, and because of my irregular eating habits, it became impossible for me to lose weight. And I'm going to be honest, I'm quite overweight now. Then, around 6 months ago, I was unfortunately diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and for the past 3 months, I have been forced to intermittently use a wheelchair because the symptoms are so severe and I have flare-ups quite frequently. But I don't really know what the reason for that is yet, so I can't even prevent that from happening. Life had already been pretty difficult for me earlier since I had been an introverted kid, and even at home, the way I was treated was not exactly ideal. But now, after my diagnosis, things have taken a turn for the worse. Earlier, I was just overweight, but now I am that fat kid in a wheelchair. I was struggling mentally, and my parents did not do anything to help me improve my situation. Instead, they started making it even worse for me because, from their behavior, it was pretty apparent that they considered me a burden on their family. So I just started restricting myself to my room as much as I could because I really did not want to bother them, and it is incredibly lonely, but I can't help it. I really don't want to feel like I'm constantly disappointing everyone around me. I always kept feeling like they didn't really want me as part of their family, but I would deal with it by shaking these thoughts off. However, after the incident that took place a couple of weeks ago, it became much more difficult to just do that. Almost 3 weeks back, my parents were discussing the Christmas postcard that we send out every year to the rest of the family, and the next day, like every year, I got dressed in the red outfit and went to the living room so I could be a part of the family photograph. It's been a ritual for years, and I thought that even though everything had changed, at least this would remain constant, and I would still continue to feel like part of my own family. But they took that away from me as well. As soon as they saw me, they got really awkward and said that they had thought that maybe this time it would only be the 3 of them because I was in a wheelchair that day. And they didn't want to spoil their photograph. I was shocked that they would even say something like that, but I tried to bargain with them. I said that I would try to stand for a couple of pictures, and it really wouldn't be that bad for me. But they insisted that I should stay in the wheelchair and just let them take the photos. That made it very obvious to me that they did not want me in the picture anyway, in the most literal sense of the phrase. So I went back to my room and cried myself to sleep, and the worst part was that nobody even came by to check on me. It was a horrible day towards the end of a horrible year, and I just couldn't bear it. So that day, I finally called my grandmother up and told her everything that was going on. My grandma is my dad's mother, and she's a wonderful person. My grandpa passed away when my dad was just 10 years old, and since then, she has built a life for herself from scratch. She's really strong and inspirational, and she loves me more than anyone else. I would have gone to live with her, but I was really holding out on the fact that at some point, my parents would probably change and treat me better. But that day, I realized that it was never going to happen. My grandmother knew that my parents didn't exactly treat me well, and several times she had asked me to move in with her if I wanted to. And that day, I told her that I really wanted to go away. I wanted to leave this house and live with her because clearly I was not wanted here. I had known that for a really long time, but I had still been fighting with myself, trying not to believe it because, at the end of the day, they were still my parents, and this was my family. But if this was my family, I was probably better off without one. She was the one who was there for me that day. She calmed me down and comforted me on the phone while I continued to sob. She also told me that she would be there in a couple of days, as soon as she was back from her cruise with her friends, and then she would take me away with her. Yeah, my grandma has a pretty cool lifestyle. Anyway, I made her promise that she would take me away, and after that, I did not say anything to my parents because I had realized that it was not worth it. They did not even bother to apologize to me after that particular incident for excluding me from the photograph. They pretended like everything was normal, and so did I, because I knew that I was going to be rescued from this place soon enough. And my grandmother, true too. Her word showed up at our place last week. For 7 entire days, I had barely spoken to my parents or Nathan. All I did was go to school, come back home, and then stay in my room for the rest of the day. But on the day that my grandmother visited, I was the one to open the door to her and invite her in. My parents did not have a clue about what was going to happen, so they seemed pretty relaxed to have her around and were acting as if everything was normal. But my grandmother was having none of it, so she asked them why exactly I hadn't been included in the Christmas postcard as soon as she was seated. The postcards hadn't even been sent out yet, so my parents were really confused as to how she found out. But then they figured out that I must have told her about that incident. And instead of acting apologetic for it, they turned to me and rolled their eyes at me, saying that I had no reason to make a big deal out of it and complained to my grandmother about that. They offered the same explanation once again. They did not want to bother me by having me stand up for the picture, and if I had my wheelchair in the photo, it would spoil the photograph. So far, I hadn't said anything, but then I took the opportunity to point out that I had told them that I was fine with standing up for a couple of minutes, but they were the ones who had refused. And that obviously meant that they really did not want me in the picture. I pointed out that they had always treated me like an outsider in my family because I did not fit in with them, even though that was not even my fault. I told them that it was ironic that even though Nathan was adopted, they treated him more like somebody who was actually their flesh and blood, as opposed to me. They only considered me a burden. Even though Nathan and I used to be close when we were children, he had observed the way that our parents treated me and had chosen to distance himself from me as well, so in the end, I was left with absolutely no one in this household. At least then, Nathan had the good sense to look away because he knew whatever I was saying was true. My parents got mad at me instantly for saying that Nathan was adopted, as if he didn't know. Obviously, he was aware of it because he was 6 years old when he came into our family. And I had never thought of him less as my brother, just because he was not biologically related to me. But my point was still true, that he always received the treatment that I didn't, not because he looked more like my parents' kid and I did not. And maybe I had kind of started resenting all of them a little bit because of how I was being treated. Even then, my parents did not take the opportunity to apologize or even act like they were sorry. They just said that I was acting spoiled, and I was being nasty by bringing up the fact that Nathan was adopted just to justify my behavior. They even went on to say that they expected an apology from me now. I was about to argue even more, but I guess my grandma had had enough by that point. She intervened and said that there was no need for that. She was here to prevent exactly this kind of mistreatment from taking place anymore. My parents looked confused. So she told them that she was taking me off their hands since they had never bothered to hide the fact that they considered me a burden on the family. I was turning 18 in a couple of months, so there was no real need to bother with custody and whatever. I could just go live with her, and it would be completely fine. My parents seemed shocked for a couple of minutes. Nobody said anything, but then they said that if my grandmother really wanted to take me with her, then she was free to do so. They were not going to stop me. They didn't even put up a fight. And it just proved all my theories to be true. They really didn't want me to be a part of the family. With me gone, it would just be my parents and Nathan. And then they could finally have the picture-perfect family that they had always wanted. When my parents said that they were fine with my grandmother taking me away, I thought that we were going to leave immediately. But my grandmother just smiled and said that they had acted exactly the way she had expected them to. And then she brought out some papers. She said that she should have done this a long time back and told my parents that she was cutting them out of her will, and now, after she passed away, everything that she had would go to me and Nathan. At first, I did not realize the implications of this, but I guess my parents did because they immediately flew into defense mode and said that it was incredibly unfair for her to treat them like that just because I was bratty and entitled. I guess I hadn't really thought about it. But my grandmother was pretty wealthy since she was one of the top real estate agents before she retired a couple of years back. So it would make sense for her to have a lot of money. And I hadn't really thought about it because I love my grandmother for who she is, not because of her money, unlike my parents. Anyway, then she told my parents that she would not be leaving anything to them, and even showed them the paperwork for it. They started bawling and said that she was being horrible and that she just couldn't do this to them, but my grandmother literally did not care. She just told me to go back to my room, pack everything that I needed, and then come along with her. Thankfully, I had pretty much kept everything packed, since I had a week to prepare for this, and I only had to drag everything out. Even when I was doing that, my parents just kept crying, begging, and bargaining with my grandmother, but she just ignored them. Nathan did not say anything. He just sat quietly in a corner, trying to disappear from the room itself. While I was leaving, he was the only person who bothered to say goodbye to me, and my parents were too busy trying to argue with my grandma to even notice that I was also leaving. Soon enough, we had driven away, and since then, I have been living with my grandma. Her place is a lot closer to my school as well, so I get to sleep in a lot longer since I don't have to wake up early for the bus and I can just walk to school. I feel like I should have switched to living with her earlier than I did, but at least it's better late than never. My parents have not bothered to contact me since I left, but Nathan sent me a text soon after. He acknowledged the fact that I had never treated him badly, but he had actually distanced himself from me, and maybe unknowingly, he had allowed the way our parents treated me to influence his behavior towards me as well. He hadn't even realized it until I had brought it up, but now that he knew about it, he wanted to make it up to me by apologizing. He said that he was really and truly very grateful for this family, because had it not been for us, he probably still would have been stuck with his biological parents and had a much worse life. He was not just thankful to my parents for adopting him, but also to me for always treating him like my own brother, and to my grandmother as well. Nathan told me that he wanted to have a fresh start with me, and so we have been hanging out at school so we can repair our relationship. It's been a bit weird for the past couple of years. Ever since he turned 13, he had been very distant from me, but now I feel like I'm slowly getting back to the old Nathan who used to put me on a pedestal. Anyway, this is not about that. It's just that he said something to me in passing yesterday while we were hanging out that really stayed with me. While talking, I just happened to ask what was going on at home because I couldn't resist wanting to know what my parents were up to. Nathan told me that the situation at home was not looking too good because apparently the blame game between my parents had started already. My mom was blaming my dad for pushing me away my entire life, and even for the incident that took place the other day because apparently it had been his idea not to include me in the picture. My dad blamed her for making me feel like I was a burden because most of the time, it was my mother who would overreact, and it felt as though having me as a child was the toughest job in the world for her. Nathan told me that at the rate that things were going, he's afraid that they might file for a divorce. And he mentioned it to me very casually, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since then. And I know that it's very stupid of me to think about it and even consider this possibility, but it's just that I have started feeling like if they get divorced, it might be my fault. It might be because I overreacted, because maybe they genuinely did not mean to make me feel like a burden or whatever. They probably did not even intend to offend me on the day of the photo shoot, but I took it to heart. I honestly don't know what to think, but I know for a fact that I will be very upset if my parents decide to get divorced. No matter what is going on with me and them right now, I feel like an idiot and a doormat for even considering these things, but I can't help it. It's just what's going on in my head. And I have tried everything to push it out of my mind, but I just can't do it. So that's why I'm here, since I feel like I need reassurance right now. And there's no better place to seek that unbiased and objective opinion than Reddit. So, AITA for getting offended that my parents didn't want me in the family photo for our Christmas postcard and telling my grandmother about it? Edit. Okay, so just to clear up a couple of things. My grandmother changed her will and left everything to me and Nathan because our parents had screwed up, but Nathan had not. I will admit that the way he had been behaving with me had not exactly been nice, but again, he's just a kid. So am I. He's not even close to 18, and I think he deserves a chance to redeem himself. Both my grandmother and I believe that he does not deserve to be punished and pushed away by his family because of what our parents did. If we act the same way, there's literally no difference between us and my parents, so I think it was pretty fair for my grandmother to include Nathan in the will as well. And as for people who were asking about his birth parents, his mom was around 19 when she had him, and had had to drop out of college for that. And the cherry on top, she was struggling with substance abuse too. Nathan's father, unfortunately, took off a couple of months after he was born, and came back into his life intermittently. My parents knew Nathan's biological mother's cousin since they went to college together, which is how my parents were able to find out about Nathan. Nathan's maternal grandparents had tried to give their daughter several chances to clean up her act and be a good mother to him, but she just couldn't do it. So when Nathan turned 6, his grandparents decided to talk their daughter into giving him up for adoption because not only was she ruining her life, but she was also spoiling his future. And my parents, coincidentally, had been thinking about adopting a second child because they wanted another kid. But my mother's first pregnancy had been pretty complicated, and she did not want to take the risk a second time. So Nathan's aunt spoke to my parents, and they fostered Nathan for a while before officially adopting him. His grandparents have stayed in touch with him, and he meets them every month, but he has never met his parents after he got adopted. His mother claims that it's been hard for her to see him again, and his dad has just disappeared from his life entirely. Ever since then, he has been my brother. There has been no debate about it. I might have brought up the fact that he was adopted, and I kind of feel guilty about it. I shouldn't have done that, but I was just very frustrated, and in the heat of the moment, I kind of lost the plot. But I have apologized to him for it since then, and we are trying to get back on good terms because I really don't want to lose him. We lost each other for a couple of years because of our parents, but we are not going to let it happen again. In fact, I have even told him that if things get too hard for him back at home because of how much our parents are fighting, he's welcome to come and live with me and our grandmother. Update 1. Hello, thank you so much for all the comments, and thank you so much for all the support that you guys have shown me. It's been a bit overwhelming for me to deal with it, but it makes me feel better to know that there have been a lot of people who have been in a similar kind of position because I was feeling really alone before this. However, knowing that you guys have made it through gives me hope. I took the suggestion that most of you guys had. I spoke to my grandmother about what I was feeling, like I was responsible for my parents fighting, and she, like everyone else, told me that I had nothing to feel sorry about. I had finally taken a stand for myself after years of tolerating the way they had mistreated me. There was nothing wrong with that. I had done literally everything in my power to make them realize what I was worth. I had put up with them for so many years and tried to assimilate myself into their family. But they kept rejecting me and pushing me away again and again. And now that they did not have anybody to blame, they had turned on each other instead. And that's really not my fault. I don't need to beat myself up about it, and that's true. I guess right now my parents don't have anybody to blame in the household, and they don't want to take it out on Nathan. So they are taking out all their anger and frustration on each other. If they get divorced, it'll be very sad, but it's not going to be my problem. And if they decide to stay together, that's still better for them. Whatever happens, I'm going to stay out of it. I have spoken to Nathan about this as well, and he told me that he had just told me what was going on at home because I had asked. But he did not intend to make me feel guilty about it. And I know that, so I told him that it was not his fault anyway, but I just wanted him to know that if he wants, then he can come and live with me, because I know that he might end up blaming himself as well. And I don't want that for him. He told me he would think about it, but right now, he would prefer to stay with our parents because he still owes them this much. And I kind of understand where he's coming from, so I have no grudges against him. We have promised each other that no matter what happens with the rest of the family, we are not going to allow that to turn us against each other, and I'm really hoping that we are able to stick to that. Update 2. Hi, so my parents came to visit me today, and when I came back home from school, they were here, sitting in the living room with my grandmother. As soon as I walked in, she told me that they were there to talk to me. But I was in no mood to talk to them since I had a pretty crappy day at school as well. So I told them that whatever it was that they had to say, they could put it in an email or they could come by later because I was really exhausted and I just needed to take a nap. But they told me that they had specifically taken time off from work to talk to me because they wanted to take me back with them. I would be leaving for college in a couple of months, so they wanted to spend the last couple of months before I left with me. They said that they were there to apologize if I had felt offended by their behavior. Now, people can say that I have been nitpicking, but I really don't like the way that they phrased it. Because what does it even mean to say that they were sorry that I felt offended by their behavior? Their behavior was offensive. That's why I felt offended. I knew that I had been doubting myself for a couple of days, but circumstances have changed now. I know that everyone agrees that what they did and the way they treated me was unacceptable. So I told them that the only reason I had been so upset was because the way they treated me was not right. I was offended because what they had done was offensive. There was no question of an if situation arising. But instead of taking that in their stride and correcting themselves, they told me that even I had been very distant from them. So of course they had no idea what I was going through. It just made me realize that no matter how hard I tried or how hard anyone tried, my parents were beyond apologies. I told them to leave, because I knew that they were just going to try and gaslight me further into believing that this was all my fault and eventually get me to apologize to them instead. I wanted to save myself the trouble, so I just told them to leave, but they refused to even get up and said that they were not going anywhere until I had sat down and dignified everything with a discussion because they deserved that at the very least, especially after everything that they had done for me, which just meant normal things that every parent does. I didn't even want to argue. I just rolled my eyes and started to go back to my room. Then my dad yelled at me and said that I was not allowed to leave without talking to them. Thankfully, my grandmother was right there, and she was not going to let this kind of behavior fly in her house. So she told my dad to keep his mouth shut and his voice low because after the way he treated me, he had no right to scream at me just because I had made the right choice for myself and left them. She instructed my father to apologize to me and said that if I did not want to speak to him, there was nothing that she could do and that they had to leave, because she was not going to allow them to mentally harass me again and again just because they were worried about their reputation and their image. They were obviously only here to get me back with them, as they were worried about what people would think if they discovered that I had moved out and was living with my grandma. But I didn't care. I had my own future to look out for. My parents tried to speak to me again, but I just told them to leave me alone because everything was still too fresh and I was not going to move on anytime soon. So eventually, they had to leave because my grandma was not going to allow them to stay much longer. After they left, she asked me if I wanted to see them again, and I told her that for a while my answer would be no. So the next time that they try to visit, my grandma is not going to invite them in. I spoke to Nathan about their visit as well, and he told me that he had no idea. They just came back home a couple of hours ago. They looked very disappointed, and nobody had even come out of their rooms in a while. I guess it's pretty depressing for him, but I can't help it. It is what it is. Update 3. Hello, folks. So I'm leaving for college in a week. I got into my first choice, and I'm really looking forward to my future now. It's going to be very difficult being on my own, but my grandmother has made all the arrangements prior to the move, and she's going to stay with me and help me settle into my apartment for the first couple of weeks. My parents and I have not spoken for the last couple of months, and my mental health has improved considerably. I'm no longer breaking down randomly during the day, so I guess staying away from them has had its benefits. Nathan has told me that things have pretty much gone back to normal in the household, and I guess they're also not any worse off without me, which makes me feel a little bad, but I'm happy for Nathan. We have obviously kept in touch, and we are going to try and get on FaceTime at least once every week. I'm going to miss my life here, but I'm excited for the future. Thanks for checking in on me.
Story 4.
Growing up in the heart of a bustling city, I never imagined I'd one day seek solace in a small town. My early years were a whirlwind of crowded streets, endless noise, and a family life that teetered on chaos. My parents worked tirelessly to provide for us, but their efforts came at the cost of our connection. As a teenager, I found solace in fixing old cars with my uncle, who owned a garage on the outskirts of town. That's where I first discovered the satisfaction of creating something functional from a pile of rusted parts. Life took a turn when I met Willa. She was magnetic, with a charm that drew everyone into her orbit. At 18, I thought I'd found my soulmate. We married young, spurred by a pregnancy that neither of us was prepared for. My uncle gifted me his garage as a wedding present, and for a while, I believed we were building a life together, but cracks began to show when our ambitions diverged. I was content running the garage, but Willa had grander dreams and a growing disdain for small-town life. Our marriage became a battleground of unmet expectations and simmering resentments. I tried to hold on, believing love and hard work could mend the growing rift. But then came the betrayals, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, and finally, the discovery of an affair. The unraveling wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful process that left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Leaving wasn't easy. By the time I packed my truck and drove away, I had endured years of manipulation and lies. I chose a path of complete reinvention, shedding the identity that had tied me to Willa and the pain she inflicted. My destination was unclear, but I knew I needed distance, both physical and emotional, from the life I'd once cherished. When I arrived in this small town, I was a broken man. My only possessions were a few tools, a battered work truck, and the resolve to start over. This place wasn't paradise, but it offered something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Slowly, I rebuilt not just a business, but a version of myself I could be proud of. Here, I discovered the resilience to face my past and the courage to embrace a future that was entirely my own. I found myself spending many quiet Saturday afternoons in the dimly lit corner of a bar at the edge of town. This unassuming spot became a haven, a place I had stumbled upon during one of my lonely walks not long after relocating here. Back then, I had left behind what I once thought was my paradise, my home, my memories, and my past. Amid the upheaval, this bar transformed into a steady refuge where I could gather my thoughts and regain a sense of calm. Shortly after my arrival, I purchased an old gas station and garage that had been sitting vacant for 2 years. The seller, eager to be rid of the property, quickly accepted my modest offer despite its state of disrepair. While it was far from perfect, I saw promise in the crumbling structure. That deal marked a pivotal moment, a chance to rebuild my life and begin anew, far removed from the betrayal and turmoil I had left behind. One of my first major projects was to expand the property by adding a retail store facing the gas pumps. I envisioned it as a convenient spot for locals, especially after the town's only grocery store closed early each evening. I also modernized the gas pumps, installing a pay-at-the-register system and moving the underground tanks to improve accessibility and safety. The effort was worth it. The upgrades created more parking space and boosted the station's visibility. The changes paid off. The store quickly became a hub of activity in the evenings, bustling with customers from 7 p.m. to midnight, while the gas station ran 24/7. The garage, located behind the main lot, kept regular hours during the week. Saturdays became my personal time, a day I spent in the garage working on side projects, a ritual I came to look forward to. Introducing liquor to the store's inventory initially ruffled some feathers, particularly at the local bar, but my goal was never competition. The station was about building stability and creating jobs in a small town where opportunities were scarce. Over time, the community came to see it as an asset rather than a threat. Farming was the backbone of this place, and many young people left as soon as they could. For those who stayed, the station became a lifeline, a reliable part of daily life. Much of the store's success was due to a woman I hired early on. She had an incredible eye for organization and completely restructured the store's layout, making it more efficient and profitable. Within months, her efforts helped me recover the equity loan I had taken out to fund the upgrades. Fridays and Saturdays became especially busy, with customers stopping by for snacks after a night at the bar. Sundays brought steady sales as well, with cold beer flying off the shelves. This particular Saturday, I was nursing a double shot of Jack Daniels with a glass of ice water and a lemon wedge. Earlier that day, I'd finished a painstaking project, replacing the steering column in an old family truck from the 1940s. It had taken me 8 months to find the right part, and even then I'd had to fabricate some pieces by hand. The truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a legacy, cherished by its owner, who clearly had no plans to retire it anytime soon. Between 4 and 7, the bar was my favorite place to be. By that time, the dinner crowd had dispersed, leaving behind a serene atmosphere. Later in the evening, live music would draw a livelier crowd. The bar had a rich history. Farmers once brought their daughters here for dances and social gatherings. Over the 6 years I'd lived here, I'd built a reputation and formed bonds with the community. People looked out for one another in this town, often giving me a heads up if anything unusual was happening. I had a routine, one visit to the bar each week, always on Saturday, always at the same time. It was my ritual, a chance to reflect in peace before heading home. But this Saturday, my routine was disrupted. My tranquility shattered the moment I saw them walk in. I recognized them immediately. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man with her was someone I had once called my son. Their presence didn't stir any fond nostalgia, only the sharp sting of betrayal I'd spent years trying to bury. They were a living reminder of a time when I was blind to the truth, even as it stared me in the face. The young man, had grown considerably. His features were sharper, more defined, and he now bore a striking resemblance to his biological father. Seeing him was a painful affirmation of a truth I had long known but tried to forget. The question that loomed now was why they were here, seeking me after all this time. I watched as they approached the bartender. The woman pulled a photo from her purse, showing it to him. He glanced at it, said something brief, and then they turned and walked out. Relief washed over me as they left without recognizing me. My long, scruffy hair, full beard, and slimmer frame had rendered me nearly unrecognizable. For the moment, my disguise and my peace remained intact. About half an hour later, the bartender approached my table. I leaned back in my chair and asked casually, "What's going on, Tom?" Tom pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and replied, "They were looking for you. Apparently they heard you were living around here and wanted to confirm it. They asked me to give you a message." "What's the message?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "They said Willa has terminal cancer. She doesn't have long and wants to make peace." I let the words sink in before responding. "And what did you tell them?" "I played dumb," he said with a smirk. "I told them I didn't know you. Even looked at their photo and pretended not to recognize it." I nodded, mulling it over. "The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The boy is her son, the one she passed off as mine for years. Do you think they're telling the truth?" Tom hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe partly, but they're definitely holding something back." I lit a cigarette, tearing off the filter first, and took a slow drag. "That's exactly what I expected. They've always been masters of deception. What they show you is never the full story." Tom gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before returning to the bar. Left alone, my mind drifted back 7 years to the day I left. I told them I wouldn't be back for 7 years, and they'd laughed, thinking I was being dramatic. What they didn't realize was that I meant every word. A few weeks before I left, I discovered that the youngest child I thought was mine wasn't. He was my brother-in-law's son. That revelation unraveled everything, sending me on a search for answers that changed my life forever. The proof came from a family member who'd seen it all and referred to them as black witches, women who thrived on manipulation and cruelty. Around the same time, I discovered an insurance policy Willa had recently taken out on me, a policy with a double indemnity clause for accidental end of life. If I died in an accident, the payout would have been $4 million. An elder in the family warned me to leave immediately, and I listened. By the time I drove away, my work truck was packed with everything I valued from our 16-year marriage. I didn't look back. I hit the county road, turned right, and by the time I stopped driving, I was 2 states away. I'll admit, some of this was my fault. I got Willa pregnant when she was 16, and I was an 18-year-old kid who thought he could take on the world. Pressured by my family to do the right thing, we got married that summer. 2 more kids followed soon after. They thought it was all a joke. Even after I left, Willa told our daughters, "He'll come back once he cools off. He just needs to find his sense of humor." But their laughter ended abruptly a few hours later when a deputy from the sheriff's department showed up at their door. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope. "Ma'am, you've just been served." "What's this?" she asked with a smirk, assuming it was part of some elaborate prank. That changed the moment she opened it. That envelope held the truth they had never expected me to know. Inside were the divorce papers I had carefully prepared with my attorney. We had laid out everything in detail, every asset, every liability. The DNA results were conclusive, proving her affair with my brother-in-law. The petition included explicit evidence, dates, times, places, receipts from their hotel stays, and even photos provided by a supplier who'd witnessed their escapades. Additionally, the legal packet included a sealed letter addressed to her sister. When she opened it, she learned I was suing her husband for unpaid child support, infidelity, and defamation. That's when the laughter truly stopped. I was no longer the punchline of their private joke. I was the one who had turned the tables. To them, I had always been the golden goose. Everything I touched seemed to succeed, and money had never been an issue. As a result, Willa and the kids had lived a life of comfort, never wanting for anything. But that afternoon, Willa discovered just how much control I had taken back. I had sold 3 of my businesses, paid off all our debts, and liquidated the 2 apartment buildings we owned for a tidy profit. I canceled every credit card and removed my name from all joint accounts. I even signed over my half of the house to her and walked away with half our net worth in cash. The only condition? She had to agree to the divorce. In one move, I reduced their monthly cash flow from $10,000 to 0. Willa's sister also learned the hard way that their scheming came at a price. My attorney froze all their assets before they could touch them. By the time the divorce was finalized, they were flat broke. After the proceedings, my attorney called Willa into his office and handed her a check, reimbursing her for a fraction of what they had lost. "Why would you do this?" she asked, stunned. "Because for me, it was never about the money," he replied. "It's about principles, something you and your sister clearly lack. I'm giving you this so you have a chance to start over. I hope you learn from this." Whether or not they learned anything, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was free, and I'd made it clear who had the last laugh. Willa refused to finalize the divorce unless I agreed to meet her face-to-face. That left us in a strange limbo, legally separated but not officially divorced. I saw no reason to entertain a conversation with someone who had deceived me for so many years. For the first time in her life, she was forced to earn a living, and she quickly realized just how quickly money dries up when it's not constantly flowing in. To stay ahead of the inevitable drama, I set up a system for important mail to be forwarded to a FedEx box, which then forwarded it to my work address once a week. I knew Willa and her sister too well to expect them to let go easily. Manipulating emotions and stirring up trouble were their specialties. Revenge wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. In their family, no one was allowed to walk away unscathed. I thought I'd distanced myself enough, but I was wrong. Tammy's appearance was proof their games weren't over. After finishing my drink, I slipped out the bar's back door, avoiding the front in case they were watching. I cut through the empty lot behind the building, wound around some back streets, and finally reached my truck. Just as I unlocked the door, a man stepped out of the shadows. "You're not easy to find, Mr. Racine," he said. "I like to keep it that way," I replied, turning to face him. "What brings you here?" "My name's Peter Edwards," he said. "I'm married to your oldest daughter, Connie." I studied him carefully. That could be a blessing or a curse, depending on whether she takes after her mother. So, what do you want? I came to talk to you, he said. There are things from the past that need settling. Maybe so, I said evenly. But that might go faster if your mother-in-law would sign the divorce papers. What divorce papers? He asked, his surprise genuine. Follow me, I said, motioning to his car. A short drive later, I turned off the main road onto a long gravel driveway and parked in front of a farmhouse. Leading him inside to a home office, I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder containing the divorce documents. Switching on the printer, I gestured toward the papers. Help yourself. Make copies of whatever you need. Peter didn't need to know I didn't actually live there. I'd built the farmhouse years ago for the grand dame of our family, hoping she might leave paradise. Peter looked about 25, polished and self-assured, with the kind of demeanor that suggested a good education. Still, I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be part of Willa and Tammy's latest scheme. He connected to my Wi-Fi and started downloading files onto his laptop. The documents included everything: detailed records, a sheriff's department report, and a letter from Willa's attorney acknowledging receipt of the money owed. The latter seemed to catch his attention the most. As he sifted through the papers, I observed his expressions closely. It was clear that much of what he read contradicted the version of events he believed. Do you think Connie knows the truth? Peter finally asked. That's for you to figure out, I said. But here's one for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer? Peter's face hardened. Who told you that? Tammy and Seth were in town today, looking for me, I replied. That's the story they told the bartender, but I know better. Willa's alive and well, living with her former lawyer. She's in a common-law marriage and expecting his second child. Peter shook his head, his frustration evident. She told me to find you so she could finalize the divorce. Said she needed it done to remarry. He pulled out his phone and called Connie, switching to speakerphone after a moment. I could hear her voice faintly in the background. Connie, Peter asked, did you know your mom lied about the divorce not being finalized? What are you talking about? She responded, confusion lacing her tone. You know Dad left because he was broke. Mom said he abandoned us. We left not long after. She told us he cleaned out what little we had and skipped town. If it weren't for stepfather, we wouldn't have made it. I'm sending you a file with the legal documents, Peter said. Have someone watch the baby and call me back once you've read it. As Peter wrapped up the call, I grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the fridge. Handing one to him, I sat back down. Why didn't you tell Connie you found me? I asked. Peter took a sip before replying. Connie and I have only been married 2 years. She just had our son 3 months ago. Honestly, I don't plan on telling anyone I found you. As far as they know, I'm just working on an investigation. He pulled out his wallet and flashed a badge identifying him as a Paradise Police Department officer. Skeptical, I opened my laptop, navigated to the department's website, and confirmed his credentials. It was a car accident report from a few months ago that helped me track you down, Peter began. Connie filed a report about your disappearance, which ended up on the wanted list. Plus, the insurance company's ruling in your favor tipped me off. So, why didn't you tell Connie you found me? I pressed. Peter leaned back, his tone cautious. While reviewing the case file, it became obvious there were some unanswered questions. First, what happened to the $250,000 cash Willa was supposed to receive along with the house deed? Second, why is everyone lying about what really happened? Sounds like you've been fed the same pack of lies I got, I said as his phone buzzed. It's my wife, Peter said, putting the call on speaker. Keep quiet. Hey, honey, Connie said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Where did you get all this? Is it true? If so, we've been lied to for years. Seth doesn't know the truth about who he is, and neither did I. My sister Karen is going to lose it. Mom pushed her away for defending Dad. Now I see it was all part of a bigger lie. Mom and Aunt Tammy gave Dad no choice but to leave. It's true, Peter confirmed. I got the records from your father's late lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to find her. Turns out her husband kept backup files on his personal computer. From the records, it's clear your mother was served with divorce papers the same day your father left. I scribbled a note for Peter to have Connie talk to her great-aunt Josie if she was still alive. He nodded as he read it. Peter, we need to find my dad, Connie insisted. He suffered enough because of Mom and Aunt Tammy. What happened to the money she got? If she had the house, why did she sell it? And why was she planning to sue Dad for desertion? None of this makes sense. Have Karen watch the baby for a bit, Peter suggested. You talk to Aunt Josie and see what she knows. Keep this between us for now. There's a lot more to this story, and it might include some serious fraud. The real question is, why has your mom been bad-mouthing your dad all these years? After ending the call, Peter turned to me. Why do you want Connie to speak with Aunt Josie? Josie knows everything about Willa and George's affair, I explained. She practically raised the family. She always suspected Tammy and Willa were scheming together. Both George and I were pawns, but their ultimate goal was never clear. If that's true, then why? Peter asked. Josie's granddaughter Jody has tried for years to convince her to move in with her, I said. But Josie insists she won't until the whole truth is out. Jody's as private as they come, just like me. Dealing with Willa and Tammy takes a toll. Using and discarding people has been their way of life. Josie was the one who opened my eyes with the evidence she collected. Peter hesitated before asking, Do you want to know anything about your kids before I leave? Not yet, I replied firmly. I need to be sure you are who you say you are. Given the family history, this could just be another angle in their game. You might want to dig into my lawyer's sudden end of life. If Willa's planning to sue me, she's awfully confident she'll win. That makes me suspicious. Peter's face paled, and for the first time, I saw the realization dawn on him. He was beginning to understand the kind of people he'd married into. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to keep each other updated. I walked him to the door, shook his hand, and watched as he drove away. After cleaning up, I locked the apartment and got in my car. Taking a circuitous route home, I stayed alert to ensure I wasn't being followed. The drive gave me time to process everything. Life had improved significantly since I left my past behind. Did I really want to revisit it? Knowing Willa and Tammy, they wouldn't stop until they had the upper hand. If they were out of money, their greed would only make them more desperate. When I finally arrived home, 2 little arms wrapped around my legs. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-olds, their laughter filling the air. They were my joy, just like their mother. "Dinner's almost ready," Jody called from the kitchen. "Wash up." I grinned and obeyed. Over dinner, I told her about everything that had happened since closing the store that afternoon. I couldn't have imagined this life 7 years ago when I walked away from paradise. A little over a year ago, I had received a call from Josie asking for my help. Her granddaughter, Jody, needed to leave a failed marriage and start fresh. At the time, I barely knew her. She'd lived out of state on an army base and was 10 years younger than me. But Josie had done so much for me that I didn't hesitate to return the favor. Now, with Jody and our children, I had found the family I never knew I needed. It took me about a week to track down a 2-bedroom apartment for Jody and furnish it with the basics. In a small town, housing options were scarce, but a friend of a friend managed to pull some strings. When I arrived to pick her up, she had already taken the steps to leave her old life behind. She'd quit her job, closed her bank accounts, and packed her belongings. Her husband was away on a 2-week military training exercise, and by the time he returned, she'd be long gone. At precisely 8 o'clock that evening, I pulled into her driveway in a rented U-Haul. Her neighbors quietly pitched in, helping us load everything she wanted into the truck without making a scene. By midnight, we were on the highway, her old life disappearing in the rearview mirror. When curious bystanders asked where I was from, I simply told them it was better they didn't know. As the miles passed, Jody and I started to get acquainted. Somewhere in the middle of the night, her phone buzzed. It was her grandmother. I couldn't help but smile when I overheard Jody say, "Yes, Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me he's got a rugged mountain man vibe. He might actually look handsome if he ever cleaned up." The following day, Josie contacted Jody's lawyer to have all her legal documents forwarded to my FedEx mailbox. Jody warned us both that her estranged husband might cause trouble, and I made sure to take precautions. Over the next few weeks, my suspicions about her situation proved true. Jody quickly stepped into the role of managing my store, and it didn't take long to see how much we needed her. She reorganized everything, resolved staffing issues, and transformed the business. Customers loved her warmth and professionalism, and the store thrived like never before. Jody's ex-husband didn't take her departure well. His escalating threats forced Josie to file a restraining order against him. His behavior led to a dishonorable discharge from the military, and he eventually returned to my old hometown, convinced Jody would show up there. Meanwhile, Jody became the center of attention in our small town. To fend off unwanted advances, she began wearing a diamond ring, a quiet signal that she wasn't available. It gave her the space to rebuild her life. In a matter of weeks, Jody gained the trust of the community, took over the store's bookkeeping, and became indispensable. Everyone accepted her because I vouched for her character. Her sharp wit and natural charm made her a perfect fit, and when asked about the ring or who the lucky guy was, she'd just smile and say, "That's a secret you'll have to figure out." Of course, rumors spread. Before long, people whispered that Jody and I had met online and that she was my mail-order bride. She didn't let it bother her. On Saturdays, when I worked alone, she'd bring me lunch, knowing I'd forget to eat otherwise. Those small gestures deepened our bond. It wasn't long before everyone assumed we were a couple, and invitations to events always included both of us. What had started as two people escaping their pasts naturally evolved into something more. Josie kept us in the loop about events back in paradise. We raised our eyebrows when we heard that Jody's ex had started cozying up to Tammy. Around the same time, Jody's divorce was finalized, marking a pivotal moment for us. That evening, we went out with friends to celebrate. Under the dim glow of the bar's lights during a slow dance, we shared our first kiss. 6 months later, we moved in together. One night, while the boys were splashing in the tub, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I grabbed a small trash bin, stood over the sink, and began shaving off my beard and mustache. By the time I finished, only stubble remained. It felt symbolic, a quiet gesture marking a new chapter in my life. When my boys saw me, they froze, staring in wide-eyed wonder. Grinning, I lathered my face with the shaving soap Jody had given me last Christmas. Then, with exaggerated care, I lathered their little faces too, pretending to shave them. Their laughter echoed through the house. Jody walked in, her blue eyes sparkling with surprise. "Well, look at this! Daddy's starting to look like his boys. What do you think? Should we cut his hair next?" "Yes!" they shouted in unison, their faces lighting up with glee. I chuckled. "Let's leave that to the barber." "Not a chance," Jody said with a mischievous grin. "I'll take care of it before you change your mind." After getting the boys ready for bed, they perched at the kitchen table to watch Jody snip away at my hair. By the time she finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The floor was littered with hair, and I felt like a completely new man. "You've got talent," I told her, running a hand over my freshly trimmed head. She smiled. "Now go rinse off before you get hair all over the house." As the warm water poured over me, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. Life had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted, but here I was, content and grounded. When I stepped out, Jody was on the phone with Josie. She hung up with a worried look. "Grandma says it's time to deal with Tammy and Willow once and for all," she said. Apparently, Connie had just visited Josie and discovered something shocking. The annuities I had purchased for my children, $600 a month each, had never been paid out. Those funds were meant to replace child support, but Willa had intercepted them. It was a wild night, but I couldn't help but grin. If I'd known that shaving and cutting my hair would get this kind of reaction from Jody, I'd have done it a long time ago. For the next week, I became the target of relentless jokes from everyone who knew us. "Who are you and what did you do with art?" they'd tease. One person even asked Jody if she'd blackmailed me into finally joining the rest of society. Jody, ever quick with a comeback, smirked and said, "I made him promise to shower at least 3 times a week." Most people laughed. A few, predictably, missed the joke entirely. But while we were enjoying lighthearted moments, trouble was brewing back in paradise. Word reached us that I was about to be sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and unpaid child support. Jody and I couldn't help but find the whole idea absurd, believing it was nothing more than a desperate stunt. However, Peter, who had been keeping us informed, warned us it wasn't a joke. The DA had already hired an attorney to represent me, and they were building a solid defense. Peter shared that Willa and Tammy had siphoned off over $48,000 meant for my children. On top of that, authorities were reopening the case surrounding my former attorney's accidental end of life. If evidence held up, Willa and Tammy could face significant prison time. 7 to 10 years was the estimate. Adding to the chaos, Willa's former attorney, now her common-law husband, was under investigation and risked being disbarred. Josie had been quietly working behind the scenes. On Sunday night, she called with an update. All the necessary paperwork would be filed the next day. She emailed me a treasure trove of evidence she'd amassed over the years, including notarized statements, recorded conversations, and the contact information of several attorneys for a countersuit. Among the files was a $2 million accidental end-of-life insurance policy I hadn't even known was still active. Josie had uncovered that Willa had purchased it 6 months before I left. Jody and I spent the entire night combing through the evidence and forwarding everything to the DA's office. By dawn, we were convinced that the lawsuit against me was a ruse. a trap to lure me back to paradise for a setup. Jody immediately contacted one of the attorneys Josie had recommended, sent over the documents, and retained their services with a significant deposit. We were prepared. The moment Willa's legal team filed their lawsuit, our lawyer would respond with a countersuit. That Friday, Jody told me Josie was on her way, with guests. They'd left paradise under the cover of darkness, stopping at a hotel before continuing their journey. By 7 p.m., 2 SUVs, a Ford Explorer and an Escape, pulled into our driveway. I glanced at the vehicles and felt my stomach tighten. Jody noticed my apprehension and reached for my hand. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there. Yet. "Who's with Josie?" Jody asked, her voice calm but curious. "That's Peter, his wife, my eldest daughter, Connie, with their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I said quietly. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, lifting our youngest child into my arms. Jody opened the door and we stepped out together as a family. The last person my daughters expected to see was me. Karen froze, tears welling in her eyes before breaking into sobs. I handed my son to Josie and pulled Karen into a tight embrace. Connie, after passing her baby to Peter, walked over and hugged me as well. The weight of the years melted away in those moments. Standing side by side, my daughters had grown into beautiful young women. It was a sight I would never forget. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said, extending a hand. We introduced everyone, and Jody served the dinner she'd prepared. Roast beef, mashed potatoes with gravy, fresh scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and a warm apple pie for dessert. It was a meal that turned our reunion into something truly special. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my family back. After dinner, as the kids played, we settled into serious conversation. "Art, can I call you Dad?" Peter asked hesitantly. I nodded. "Of course. Dad," Peter continued, "the DA has new evidence. It looks like Jody's ex's car was involved in your lawyer's fatal accident. Investigators have located the current owner and are conducting forensic tests on the paint. If the connection is confirmed, it could lead to manslaughter charges." He paused, then added, "The fire that destroyed your lawyer's office the same night has always been classified as arson. Surveillance footage places Jody's ex at the scene, watching the building burn. Willa and her attorney sealed your divorce documents, likely thinking no evidence remained. But now they've officially filed their lawsuit against you." Jody's eyes filled with tears. "All this time, I thought you were being overly cautious when you brought me here," she said softly. "But now I see you were protecting me. You asked Grandma so many questions, and I thought it was overkill. But now I understand. You needed to know exactly who we were dealing with." Josie nodded. "Willa and Tammy received notice of the countersuit on Thursday. They must have realized I'd been helping you. That's why we left paradise in such a hurry. I knew it wouldn't take long before they tried to maltreat me." "Grandma, your house is ready," Jody said warmly. "It's fully furnished. You only need to bring your clothes." "I packed most of what I need," Josie replied. "Connie is shipping the rest, including my personal items and antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house. It's time for me to leave paradise, and I'm not looking back." "I'll drive back with Peter and Connie," I said. "We'll rent a truck and haul everything out. It's time to see if our suspicions are correct." "What suspicions?" Peter asked, his expression darkening. "That the lawsuit is a ploy to draw me out," I replied. "Willa still has that $2 million accidental end-of-life policy, and I think they're hoping to cash in. The lawyer's end of life was likely a test run." Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie sat in stunned silence as the realization dawned on them. "They were planning your end of life," Connie whispered, her voice shaking, "even before you left." I nodded solemnly. "That's why I left the way I did. I suspected their motives, but even my lawyer didn't believe me until it was too late." Peter excused himself to make a few critical phone calls. While he stepped out, I sat with my daughters, Jody and Josie, catching up on everything we'd missed in each other's lives. Jody, ever the archivist, dug out some old photos of me from when we first met. Connie and Karen laughed as they admitted they wouldn't have recognized me if they'd passed me on the street. When Peter returned, the room grew quiet as he shared the latest developments. "Willa will be taken into custody right after the holiday," he began. "She's being charged with 3 counts of theft for stealing the annuities meant for her children. We're slowing the process so she won't have a bond hearing for several days." He looked directly at me. "Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, Rent a U-Haul and make a few stops at familiar places to ensure you're seen. It'll force Willa to communicate from the city jail. Just tell anyone who asks that you're helping Josie pack up her things." Jody's expression turned stormy, and she fixed Peter with a glare. "Are you seriously telling me that the father of my children is your bait to lure my cousins into making a move? What guarantees can you give me that I won't get a call saying I've become a widow before we're even legally married?" Before I could respond, Jody sighed heavily, already knowing my answer. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" Without hesitation, Josie placed a calming hand on Jody's shoulder. "Sweetheart, Art has always been this way. He's never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. When you needed help escaping your ex, he didn't think twice. He wants us free of Willa and Tammy's grasp, once and for all." Jody gave a small, reluctant smile. "My only fear is that Art will walk right into the lion's den." Josie chuckled. "If Art were a boxer, he'd be the undefeated champion of the world. Those witches don't stand a chance. They never see him coming." I spoke up, trying to lighten the mood. "Relax, ladies. Peter's got my back. And if anything happens to me, he'll have to deal with Connie." Peter said nothing but gave a firm nod, his face showing he understood the risks. Later, while the women were busy in another conversation, Peter and I spoke privately. "The DA believes Jody's ex will act as soon as he hears you're back in town," Peter said. "He'll know you helped Jody leave him, and that will set him off." "How will he find out?" I asked. Peter leaned in slightly. "Willa will pass the information to him through a planted informant in the city jail by Thursday morning. If he's caught in the act, do you think he'll confess?" I thought for a moment before answering. "He's a follower, not a leader," Peter continued. "Whenever he's been caught before, he's owned up to it. He sticks with Willa and Tammy because they pull the strings and he doesn't know how to resist." The sign ahead read, "Welcome to Paradise, City of Refuge. Population, 34,823. It was a stark reminder of what I'd left behind. Paradise operated like its own little Wild West. The city council had long declared that federal laws didn't entirely apply here. Justice depended on who held the reins, and those in power bent the rules to suit their interests. Progressivism was what they called it, but in truth, the privileged paid the price for the sins of the powerful. 7 years had passed since I'd left, but Paradise hadn't changed much. Main Street had a fresh coat of asphalt, but otherwise it was frozen in time. I decided to make my first stop somewhere guaranteed to attract attention, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar. Thankfully, the diner was still standing, freshly painted but otherwise unchanged. I parked the U-Haul, stepped out, and walked toward the entrance. It was just past 11 a.m., the calm before the lunch rush. If I played this right, my presence would spread through town like wildfire. As I scanned the menu, I noticed familiar faces stealing glances. A few discreetly pulled out their phones. I waited for the server to approach with my coffee. "Are you ready to order?" she asked. "Is today's special still meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes?" I asked casually. The server blinked, startled. "That's not on the menu. It's only for regulars." "Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and fried onions on the meatloaf," I said with a knowing grin. The server looked confused. "I'll just let him know myself," I added, standing. Ignoring her protests, I walked through the kitchen's swinging doors. The staff looked up in surprise as Jack, the owner, turned to face me. His face lit up with a smirk. "You dumb A," he said. "You're a couple of weeks early. Welcome back." He turned to the server. "Susan, bring his coffee to the back. Art's eating at the staff table so we can catch up." Jack was the son of the original owner, and we'd been friends for decades. We reminisced until just before the lunch rush. At one point, he had a staff member call his wife, Sasha, to the diner. When Sasha arrived, I stayed seated, waiting for her to notice me. She walked in, looking puzzled. "Jack, what's so urgent?" she asked. I stood and turned to her. Her face shifted from confusion to shock. "What's the matter, little sis?" I teased. "Didn't expect your mean old brother to come back?" Her composure crumbled, and she rushed into my arms. I held her tightly as years of distance melted away. Once she composed herself, Jack asked the staff to give us privacy. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sasha asked. "No," I replied. "Let's keep it that way for a few days." "Is this about Willa being taken into custody?" she pressed. I nodded. "Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'll be staying under police protection while I'm here. They've reopened the case on my lawyer's end of life, and they think it's tied to the arson at his office." The looks on Jack and Sasha's faces said it all. Paradise had been buzzing with rumors about the district attorney's aggressive push to revisit old, unresolved cases, ever since his appointment 3 years ago. "You're being used as bait," Jack said in a low voice. "They're setting a trap." "Exactly," I replied. "This whole plan is designed to bring them out of hiding. If it works, we'll have answers for the arson, the homicide, and plenty of other crimes. Willa's arrest, combined with my sudden reappearance, will force their hand." "What's driving all this?" Jack asked, his brows furrowing. "A $2 million accidental end-of-life insurance policy," I said simply. "On me." Sasha walked with me to the rental truck, keeping her voice low as Tammy's car pulled into the lot. Leaning closer, she asked, "Where are you staying?" "At Josie's old place," I said. "I'm helping pack up her belongings. She's moved to be closer to her granddaughter and my boys." Sasha's eyes widened in surprise. "Your boys?" I nodded with a small smile. "Jody and I have been together for 5 years. We have 2 boys, 3 and 4 years old." Her mouth opened slightly in shock. "How did you and Jody end up together?" "Josie and I stayed in touch after I left Paradise," I explained. "When Jody needed help leaving her marriage, Josie called me. I helped her move, and she stayed where I lived. We've suspected for a while that her ex might have been involved in my lawyer's end of life in the fire." "Do Willa and Tammy know you're onto them?" Sasha asked. "Not yet," I said, "but it won't take them long to figure it out." Tammy stepped out of her car and approached, her expression sharp and calculated. "Art," she began, her voice tinged with irritation, "you need to drop part of your lawsuit. The DA is planning to charge Willa within the next 2 days." "Unfortunately, my lawyer says that's not an option," I replied. "Willa filed a new divorce petition accusing me of desertion, child abandonment, and unpaid support. Until the court rules on those claims, nothing changes." Tammy's frustration flared. "How are we supposed to bail her out when you've frozen all the assets?" I shrugged. "Maybe your father could help. He could use his house as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy glared at me but said nothing. Turning on her heel, she walked away in defeat. I watched her leave, knowing the noose was tightening. "She's dreaming if she thinks their father will help," Sasha said, shaking her head. "He cut ties with them when he learned the truth about Seth's parentage. He said more than once that they're just like their mother." Her words brought a faint smile to my lips. After saying my goodbyes, I climbed into the U-Haul and drove toward Josie's house, stopping along the way to pick up packing supplies. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting. I backed the truck tightly against the garage door, locked it, and went inside. Something felt off. Josie had said she'd leave the curtains open, but they were drawn. Uneasy, I texted Peter to ask if the police had been inside. He confirmed that officers had been through earlier and likely closed them. Somewhat reassured, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. A police officer greeted me immediately, extending a phone toward me. "Mr. Racine, Peter Edwards wants to speak with you," the officer said. I took the phone. "What's up, Peter?" Peter's voice came through, direct and serious. "Looks like the right people know you're back. Tammy already approached you, didn't she? She's probably trying to get you to release the lien on Willa's assets." "She did," I said. "I refused." "Good," Peter replied. "We recorded Willa and Tammy discussing how to adjust their plans. Jody's ex, Brad Press, came up repeatedly in their conversation. Willa told Tammy to inform Brad that you know where Jody is. That should push him into action. And it looks like it did. He showed up less than an hour ago. Willa also told him you're at Josie's house. The knot in my stomach tightened, but I kept my tone even. "Understood. Keep me posted." The rest of the day was uneventful. I spent my time sorting Josie's belongings and packing boxes. Around 6:30 p.m., a pizza delivery arrived. When the driver asked if I was moving, I casually replied, "Just helping a friend pack up." The night was quiet until it wasn't. Around 11 p.m., Brad made his move. Using a tire iron, he jimmied the front door lock and slipped inside. A dim light in the kitchen guided him as he crept forward, a 9mm pistol tucked under his shirt. He found me sitting calmly at the table, sipping coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said casually, though his voice carried an edge. "Willa and Tammy send their regards. I just need to know where Jody is." Setting my mug down, I locked eyes with him. "Sorry, Brad, I don't share information with butchers or arsonists," he smirked. "What makes you think I'm either?" "You've always struck me as someone who's easy to manipulate," I said evenly. "How much of the $2 million insurance policy on me did they promise you?" Brad's expression faltered. $2 million, he stammered. "They told me it was $750,000. I chuckled darkly. "Did you know Seth isn't even Willa's? He's Tammy's first husband's son. They've been playing games like this for years, manipulating people like you and me. My lawyer figured it out and sued them for everything they had. Brad's face turned ashen. That's why Willa's claims of desertion were a sham, I continued. The divorce was finalized ages ago. They just never filed the paperwork. They wanted to lure me back. Leaning forward, I spoke firmly. You're just another pawn in their game. Ask yourself, what's their plan for you? They tried to eliminate me once. What makes you think they won't do the same to you? Brad swallowed hard, realization dawning. I'm screwed, aren't I? You have a choice, I said. Work with the DA, testify against them, and get a lighter sentence. Or stay their pawn and take the fall. Brad hesitated, then slowly placed the pistol on the table. Call the cops, he muttered. I nodded toward the doorway. Brad, no need. They're already here. Connie watched her husband, Peter, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression a mix of focus and relief. Earlier, Peter had told her that her father was staying at Josie's house, but now, a late-night call had pulled them both out of bed. While Peter spoke, Connie headed to the kitchen and put the kettle on, preparing hot chocolate for the two of them. When Peter finally ended the call, a smile broke across his face. Your dad pulled off something incredible tonight, he said. Brad broke into the house intending to cause trouble, but your dad stayed calm, talked him down, and got him to confess everything. The undercover officers caught the whole thing on video. Connie froze, processing what she'd just heard. How in the world did Dad do that? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Peter shrugged. He told Brad a few hard truths, like the real story about Seth's parentage. Then he planted the idea that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out if it was tied to a homicide. I don't even know if that's true. But it was enough to make Brad second-guess everything. Rather than risk life without parole, he decided to cooperate. Aunt Josie always said Dad was quick on his feet, Connie said, shaking her head. But this, I never saw it coming. What does this mean for Mom and Tammy? If Brad testifies in court, your mom and Tammy will face charges for arson, manslaughter, and likely attempted homicide, Peter replied. Without hesitation, Connie picked up her phone and called Jody to share the news. Together, they made a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a few days, so Jody could fly out. Connie would pick her up from the airport once she got the flight details. After coordinating with Jody, Connie contacted her sister to fill her in while Peter got dressed and left for the station to secure Brad's signed statement before morning. I didn't wake up until 8 a.m. The first thing I did was call Jack to arrange repairs for the front door. True to his word, Jack knew someone. Within half an hour, a handyman arrived and got to work. The new door, complete with fresh trim and a reinforced lock, was installed just as Connie's car pulled into the driveway. Jody was with her. The moment Jody stepped out of the car, tears streamed down her face as she ran toward me. I opened my arms, and she collapsed into them, overwhelmed. Brad was arrested last night, I told her gently. He surrendered without resistance. The officers had everything under control. I was never in any real danger. If that's true, why didn't you call me? Jody asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Why did I have to hear about it from Connie? It was almost 2 a.m. when everything settled, I admitted. I figured I'd call you first thing today. Wrapping my arm around her, I held her close. I promise, I whispered. I'll never put myself in that kind of situation again. After finishing the repairs, we packed Jody's luggage into the car and drove to Jack's restaurant for breakfast. There, we met Karen, Sasha, and my parents. The staff pushed 2 tables together to fit everyone, and my family warmly welcomed Jody. The meal was filled with laughter, stories, and delicious food. My parents were thrilled to hear about our 2 sons, Carson and Hunter, named after my grandfathers. They eagerly scrolled through photos on Jody's phone, marveling at how much the boys looked like me. My daughters shared the story of how they found Josie and discovered I was still alive. As breakfast ended, Peter arrived looking tired but determined. It's done, he announced. Willa and Tammy are in custody, and Brad has confessed to his intent to liquidate Art. He'll face charges for arson and manslaughter. Tammy and Willa will be charged with grand larceny, conspiracy to commit homicide, and fraud. Peter turned to Jody. The DA is working to finalize Art's divorce with the judge who handled the case before. They're pushing for an immediate resolution. Jody's eyes widened. Does this mean Art and I can finally marry? Peter nodded. The paperwork is already with the judge. They're trying to waive Willa's signature, skip the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. I smiled at Jody. Guess I need to buy a proper ring and propose officially. The table erupted in cheers and laughter. Tears filled Jody's eyes as she leaned into me, overcome with emotion. Before leaving, my parents invited us to dinner. We spent the afternoon packing before heading to their house, where they peppered Jody with questions about her life and how we came together. She recounted how I helped her leave a broken marriage and how we built a life together. The evening took a joyful turn when Peter and Connie arrived with the finalized divorce certificate. "It's official," Peter declared. "You're free." Jody beamed as she shared stories about our life and children. My mother, ever the planner, suggested we have a wedding before heading home. My father pulled Peter and me aside to discuss details over a couple of beers. Peter updated us on the case. "Since Tammy's arrest, more information is pouring in. We've only scratched the surface. The DA's office is flooded with leads." I asked about Willa's common-law husband. "Is he involved?" Peter shook his head. "He might lose his law license, but there's no solid evidence against him. He may end up raising their kids." Connie appeared, grinning. "By the way, Jody's ring size is 6.5. Peter and I headed to the mall, where I bought a stunning 3-ring engagement set. Later, at home, I gathered everyone in the living room. Kneeling in front of Jody, I asked her to marry me. Caught off guard, she gasped, but quickly said, "Yes." Cheers erupted as my father raised his glass. 7 years is too long not to toast my son and his bride. That Friday, we picked up our marriage license at City Hall. Jody was delighted to discover she fit perfectly into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man, while Karen stood as Jody's maid of honor. Even the DA offered to officiate. Jody insisted I upgrade from my usual jeans, so I reluctantly bought a suit at Macy's. On Sunday, in my parents' backyard, we exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony surrounded by loved ones. Even the twins' father attended quietly. The day was simple yet moving, leaving many in tears. After the ceremony, my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," he said with a warm smile. "It's an early inheritance. The rest will go to your daughters." I thanked him and tucked it into my suit pocket, forgetting it until later. Family members recorded the ceremony and sent it to Aunt Josie so she could share in the moment. When asked about our honeymoon, Jody smiled. "After everything we've been through, it'll wait until Grandma is settled. We're planning a week in Florida and California, enjoying Disney with the kids. Family is what brought us here." The next day, as we prepared to leave, I handed Jody a note with a bank promissory for $100,000. The handwritten message read, "Thank you for setting things right. I always suspected the twins were involved in their mother's end of life. Watching them face justice will be satisfying for me and my granddaughters." Jody read it silently and slipped it into her purse. After tearful goodbyes with my parents and daughters, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul. The drive home felt lighter, free of the burdens of the past. For the first time in years, the road ahead was clear, full of hope and promise for our future.